Sure. Yeah, no, that sounds good. I stopped that, so you should be able to do it now.
Okay, let's see here. We are live on YouTube.
We are live on YouTube.
Okay.
I still can't do the gallery view. Are you seeing the gallery view, Ethan?
No, but I don't have video. So
If you give me 1 second to finish setting the streaming up,
Oh, no, you're fine.
will be able to maybe take a look at it.
Take your time.
Copy. I want to get us on the website now.
Never mind, I see.
you got it?
Yeah. I had to
Awesome.
turn my video on.
Hi, Britta. Hello? Oh, maybe.
She appears to be
Maybe she.
muted.
Hang on 1 second. Hi, I'm here.
There we
Britta,
go.
how are you?
I'm going to mute you guys back out. I was just getting you up and running.
All
Okay,
right.
that sounds great.
All right, Chris, we are live on the website too.
Great. Thank you. I'm trying to scarf down some food before this gets started.
That's a little bit why I laughed, because I turned on the video and it was you eating.
Yes. Let me mute so that you don't hear me chewing too.
All right, I'm going to step away for just a minute. I'll be right back.
Okay.
I too am going to be right back.
Okay.
And Emily, it looks like Mike Lemaire is just getting on. He said, he just emailed me and that his meeting invite didn't work before, so I'm sending him another one. Just a heads up, so. And then for everybody who's in the meeting, I'm gonna go ahead and start the recording.
Thanks, Ethan.
Yeah? Hi, Kathy. Hi, Earl.
Hey,
Hello. How are you?
How are you guys? Good. How are you doing?
Good.
doing well. Speaker. I don't think my camera's on. How the hell do you do this?
Lower left, there's a video, little camcorder.
Oh, that's okay. There we go.
Hey,
Of course, now there's the light in the room is shorting out, so I may be in the dark.
Oh, no. It'll
Every-
add a little
my
mystery to
meetings.
the meeting.
Yeah. I'm always playing with light. I'm either closing a curtain, opening a curtain, turning a lamp on, turning a lamp off, just to get somewhat non-spooky visage.
Exactly.
Kathy, I think this might be the last Zoom meeting I get to see the skier. I know.
Oh, I didn't
Good
realize it was a
look.
rabbit. Cool.
Ski bunny, right?
Ski
So-
bunny, that's right, yeah.
or ski lapine, or however they call it in Italian. So
Yeah, it's become a little part of my Zoom experience,
I
is your
know.
bunny.
special things you wouldn't know.
I know.
about people.
How are you doing, Earl?
I'm doing well.
Excellent.
More or less well. I've been having some back and shoulder problems that I've been getting some PT for. Other than that, I'm doing well.
Great.
At least you're able to get the PT.
Mike,
Hey, guys.
hello.
Let's go, Mike.
Hey, Mike.
I lost the invite. I just got Ethan to send me one.
Oh,
He's
shoot,
quick.
you actually sent that to him, Ethan?
Oh, yeah.
Rats.
I was wondering because I looked at the email and it hadn't downloaded the information for some reason.
Oh,
That was the option
Right.
Ethan selected. Don't allow to download. Mike, I was going to call you earlier today just to chat about tonight, and we could talk about this more formally when we get into the meeting, but there's a lot of the survey questions. We could spend hours wordsmithing and adding phrasing and
Yeah,
you know, and my recommendation to you and the commission is we want to hear all of it. But I think for wordsmithing, redlining, adding phrases, changing a phrase, you know, I'm going to suggest that commissioners email us directly.
yeah.
And then, sorry, having an interruption. Stop, go, please. Nothing I can do. But
That's more
You know-
interesting than your dog.
yeah. Have you seen the newscaster where their kids come in while they're on live with BBC
Yeah,
all across the
I've seen-
world?
Yep, I've
Yeah.
seen that.
But anyway, you know, I do think we should, my recommendation to you guys at least, it's, you know, it's your meeting, but my recommendation is that we take advantage of the group time and really discuss ideas and concepts and, you know, the big picture of what the survey is and attempting to accomplish. Undoubtedly, we will need to discuss specific questions. I would just recommend we keep it from getting, you know, too deep in the weeds.
I agree. I do think we should go through them question by question.
Sure. But it could
Okay.
be that there's no big picture discussion on a particular question. There might be edits and red lines,
Right,
but if there's no big picture discussion, I think we can then move on to the next question.
sure. Sounds good.
and then for everybody joining the meeting, you are live on YouTube and recording.
That must have been Ethan.
Yes, I apologize. That was me. Ethan.
Okay, I think I'll go ahead and start the meeting. I
One,
believe
two,
it's
three,
5:02.
4, 5, yeah.
504?
I was just counting the number
502.
of commissioners that we had on the call.
How many do we have on the call?
Believe
I
it.
just checked in. This is Dory Kaplan.
All right, there we go.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I
Four.
believe.
I'm
Yep,
here.
it looks
This is
like-
Britta.
Looks like we're missing Commissioners Miller and Commissioner Wyman. So I am trying to contact them as we speak.
Okay, we'll give them a couple more minutes, huh?
Okay, that sounds great.
I do notice that Elliot is on the call with us. I can kind of touch on this while we're waiting. So Chairman, I might suggest just, I might have Brett highlight, as he starts to go through the questions, highlight the questions that relate to Elliot, and let's do those out of order first so that we can then excuse him, be respectful of his time, and then we can pick up from where we left off. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Chris, could you put your volume out? I could hardly hear you. Of
Sure. Let's see here.
course, I don't know how to do mine, so.
That might be what, I hear Chris pretty well.
That could
I
be
did
the
too.
problem.
Yeah, it may be yours, Dory. But on my computer, there's a little speaker with some wave sounds on the lower right-hand corner. And if you click on that, there's like a slider you can adjust. So you might have something like that on your desktop.
Is everybody soft or just me?
No, I can hear you fine, Chris. I can
Okay.
hear
I
everybody.
can hear you fine now,
I can
too.
hear you fine too.
I increased my volume here.
Okay.
Sorry.
No.
So it's 5:05. I think I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We can start slowly and hope the other two join in. Are you there, Ethan?
I am here.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. The June 23rd, 2020 meeting of the Cherry Hills Village Planning and Zoning Commission will now come to order at 5:05 p.m. In conformance with city regulations and the governor's safer at home order, we are conducting this meeting virtually. Could the community development clerk please read the welcome slide?
First of all, welcome to our virtual meeting. This is the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting on June 23rd, 2020. This meeting is live streamed and recorded at the link seen on the screen right now. You are automatically muted as you enter the meeting. Reminder, please to state your name before speaking. A reminder for commissioners that all votes will be by roll call. Audience participation will be held at the beginning of the meeting. Participants will be asked to speak during audience participation in the order they signed up with the city clerk, When it's your turn to speak, the clerk will unmute your line and you will have 5 minutes for public comment. If you have any technical difficulties, please reach out to Emily, our parks coordinator, whose email is listed on the screen, and we will do our best to assist you.
Thank you, Ethan. Could we have the roll call of members?
Holland,
Here,
Kaplan,
Here.
Lemaire,
Present.
Lucas? Lucas? I know he's here. Let me,
He's raising his
oh,
hand.
he's waving.
He's waving his hand. He's here.
Okay.
Is he muted?
Miles? It looks like we're having trouble unmuting him. Commissioner Miles?
Present.
I'm
There you go.
unmuted. Sorry, Mike.
Okay, there you are.
I'm here.
Welcome, Bill.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Commissioner Miller? And Commissioner Wyman? You have a quorum. And I am still trying to reach both Commissioners Miller and Wyman.
Ethan, this is Emily. If you want, I can jump off and call them if that might help.
I did try to call Jennifer and I was just about to call David.
Okay.
Thank you, though.
Okay, next on the agenda, thank you, Ethan. Audience participation period. Do we have anybody signed up to speak?
There is nobody signed up to speak for audience participation.
Okay. Number 4, consent agenda. First item, approval of minutes from our meeting of April 14, 2020.
I move to approve the minutes for the meeting of April 14, 2020. This is Dory.
Thank you, Dory.
I'll
we
second
have-
Dory. I'll second Dory's motion.
Okay, thanks, Bill. All in favor of approval?
Aye.
Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous, motion carries. Next item, number 5, any items removed from consent agenda? Ethan?
There was nothing, just in case he's busy, there was nothing removed from consent. There was only one item and you voted. So new business is eligible.
Very good, thanks.
Correct.
Next item, new business, presentation on the amendment to the section 16-5-120, updating the city's floodplain management regulations. Director Kramer.
Good evening, members of Planning and Zoning Commission. This item before you tonight is a text amendment to the section of the zoning ordinance related to the floodplain management regulations that are in our code. In short, once every anywhere from 8 to 13 years, FEMA will update their map panels, including all of the previous few years map revisions that various communities submit. And instead of those just piling up and people having to cross-reference those map panels, they reissue new ones that incorporate all of those map changes. That time for Arapahoe County is now. There are no changes to the Cherry Hills Village map areas, but we are included in the map panels that FEMA is adopting on September 4th. As a result, we were informed by FEMA that we have an obligation to adopt the new map panels so that community members participating in the flood insurance program still continue to be eligible. So our goal is to have this passed by City Council actually a few weeks before the September 4th deadline. So there are no substantive changes. I have no presentation because I can't show you any sections of the map that are actual changed. We have copies of the map in our office as required by FEMA. And staff is recommending that Planning and Zoning recommend approval to City Council. And we're available for any questions you might have.
I have a question.
Please.
Is there a fiscal impact to this? Or is
There
it
is no
significant?
fiscal, there is no fiscal impact to the city either way. However, there would be a fiscal impact to residents should we
Right.
not pass it should be a fiscal impact to residents who have flood insurance. Should we not pass the updated flood panels because their flood insurance, our rating would go to the maximum, which would be 10, and their flood insurance rates would increase dramatically.
Okay, but you answered the way I want, Chris, or the way I was wondering, or you confirmed that the city's not paying any additional fee
Correct.
to have this.
Correct.
Chris, I have a question. Did you or somebody on your staff compare the new maps with the old maps?
So our Public Works Department and Kimley Horn took a look at them as well. They were represented to us by FEMA and the Mile High Flood Control District that there were no changes. Our review shows that to be the case.
Okay. And then, did they also represent that there's no change to the text of the regulations? Or do we?
We are not adopting any text. We are only adopting these panels.
Okay. Okay, great. All right.
And Chris, just one suggestion, when it goes before council, even though it doesn't mean anything, there haven't been any changes, I would suggest or recommend that you actually include a copy of the map panel.
Yeah, it's massive. Yeah,
is it?
absolutely. Yeah, it's huge. When you're in the office and you lay them out on the counter, it can take up almost the whole county because it's all of Arapahoe County that we're adopting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So unfortunately, we don't get to just adopt our couple of panels that apply to us.
I get you.
But maybe actually, Commissioner, I think you did spark an idea. Maybe it's possible for us to pull out those panels that do apply to Cherry Hills Village. It wouldn't necessarily be the entire package, but it would be the most relevant portions.
Or maybe it's just something that council could click on. I know I would always raise saying, I got uncomfortable, even though it didn't mean anything. It was saying, hey, we're approving something we haven't really even looked at, even though
Sure.
staff has recommended it. And I suspect somebody else on council will make that same concern.
Understood.
I think there's a way that they can link onto it and
Yep.
look at it.
That sounds good.
Thank you, Earl. Any other questions from the commissioners?
I'm wondering if, this is Dory, if individual property owners that have been insured under this plan, if they've received direct notice of this update? Or does it all come from Cherry Hills Village from?
For FEMA in general, the updates are based on what all communities send to them to make changes to the previous mapped panels. And so, in essence, if we were to adopt an amendment to the floodplain, that would also be added onto the map panels that council would adopt. It's sort of like a zoning amendment. If you change the zoning, it's the zoning map plus any zoning changes since the map has been updated. It's a similar concept here. So from that perspective, their individual residences' floodplain coverage is unchanged,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Any other questions? Okay. I guess we should do a roll call vote.
We need a motion, and
Need a motion.
Earl, I'll go ahead and move to recommend that the city council approve the proposed council bill by amending section 16-5-120 concerning floodplain management regulations.
I'll second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Let's have a roll call vote. All in favor?
Olin?
Aye.
Oh,
Do you want to do it one by one, Ethan?
we can do it by roll call if you'd like. So,
I doubt it. Let's try a roll call. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Unanimous, motion carries.
And then before, this is Ethan, before we jump into the next agenda item, I was able to reach both Commissioners Miller and Commissioner Wyman. Commissioner Miller is unable to join the meeting and apologizes, but Commissioner Wyman, he'll be joining momentarily.
Oh, good.
Great. Thanks for doing that, Ethan. Okay, the next agenda item is the master plan draft community survey. Hopefully everybody has read the draft questions. We talked before everybody got on the phone. I think most people were on the phone. And Chris recommends that we keep our discussion at a high level and focus on concept and save the editing and wordsmithing and that kind of thing for later. And most likely everybody will have written comments to submit directly to Chris after we're done with our discussion. Does that sound good to the other commissioners?
Yes.
Good by me.
And Commissioner, if I could just add one thing, I do want to re-emphasize, everybody may have heard me say this already, but we do want to hear everybody's red lines, suggested wording, phrase changes, additions. We do want to hear that. So please send those to us. It may elicit some back and forth between us and Britt, and it may be just like, good catch. That's a much better way to do it. So please send us those. We don't want to exclude comments. We just want to make sure we're making most efficient use of this group time.
Very good. Chris, do you have a suggestion on how we handle the input from several members of the Citizens Advisory Task Force who wrote letters or memos that are attached?
So my recommendation is that, Britt has a little bit of an introduction into some of the survey questions. My recommendation is that we allow him to maybe hit that and then us go through some of the higher level concepts with the existing questions. I think some of the discussion from the input received from CAT members, if we were to lead with that, might be a little out of context without us having
Sure.
had an opportunity to talk about the topics themselves first.
I
So
would like to cover those letters at the end, but again, I think we can pull out 2 or 3 or 4 essential points from each one and discuss those at sort of a high level as well.
Well, there's a couple that are raising some very high level questions.
Yeah.
And I again, another reason to not get bogged down in some of the smaller details, because it would be a shame if we did not have enough time to touch on those higher level questions. So again, my recommendation, Chairman, is to turn it over to Britt, let him do a brief introduction, hit the few questions that relate to Elliott, and then let us keep going through questions. Again, if we don't have any high level feedback, we just have edits, we can just move on to the next question.
Okay, that sounds great. Britt?
Could I interrupt? Are the letters you're referring to from Alex Brown, Janie Carpenter,
Yes,
and Laura Chrisman?
I
Are
think,
just the 3? Were there more than that that you wanted?
Yeah, there
I
were
believe
Jeff
Ethan
Wellborn.
emailed.
Jeff Wellborn, Doug Robinson,
Oh, right, okay.
and then Bob Serrata.
okay. All right.
Thank
Britt,
you.
go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you. Dory, are you okay?
Yes,
Is that good? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that question. Want to make sure everybody has all those.
Okay.
Britt, go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Chair. We'll just go through a few introductory comments about the survey questions, and some of this material is a repeat from when we last spoke with you back in May. Some topic for discussion tonight. This survey may be available by mail or online. That's one discussion item to think about as we go through the questions and the next steps of how we move forward with the survey. This initial survey is focusing more on existing conditions and defining key issues and opportunities as opposed to detailed policy solutions. That's the general flavor of initial survey.
Hey, Brett, can I ask a question?
Yes.
When you say available by mail or online, and so online, you'll be able to fill it out online. It's just not available, but you can actually fill it out and send it in online.
Correct.
Okay, good.
Right.
That was a point that Jeff Wellborn made that I thought was a good one, so.
Yes. Any survey that we would put out for the demographic questions to find out about who's taking the survey, their background, where they live, things like that. As we discussed throughout this process, we've included a number of pictures and graphics in this draft survey for consideration. Certainly those can be changed and edited, and it's an initial attempt at those, but I think it's good to have graphics along with many of the questions, but certainly not all of them have pictures and graphics. Some are a little more cut and dried and don't have pictures and graphics, but those are some high-level comments we might get from you all, or perhaps edits along the way. And as we mentioned last time as well, we anticipate there would be 2 additional surveys of some format later on in the master plan process. One looking at alternative concepts, and the third looking at preferred direction for the plan. That'd be way down the line here with the master plan process. So right now we have a total of 24 questions. And last time we mentioned there's no magic number for the number of questions, ideally on a community survey. Something in the order of 15 to 20 is pretty typical. We have perhaps more questions here that we want to include in the final version of the community survey. So there's some here that may come out. There are some extra ones here to consider, but it's the initial set for consideration from the group here. We have, since the last time we talked with you, we've of course commiserated back and forth with city staff. We've added a question geared to an overall vision question to the survey up front. And we've added various images, especially focusing on concepts for character, housing, transportation, and parks. Some pictures are from Cherry Hills Village, not all. Some are just example photos, but welcome your feedback this evening on all of that. And then next steps after we get done with tonight's discussion, towards the end of it, will be discussion about the initial CAT meeting and then the process of moving forward with the survey and really the timing of it. And those relate to some of the comments from the CAT members actually you might have read along the way as well. So with that, that's a very short, brief intro. I think I have to unstop share and reshare. Skip over to the questions themselves. All right. So this is the set of questions you all received a couple weeks ago. And as mentioned, Elliot Solsky from FHU is on the line. Elliot, say hello.
Hello, and yeah, can you hear me? I appreciate the offer, but please don't go out of order on my account. I'm fine for the duration. So I'd suggest to just go in order.
Okay. All right. Chris, I guess we'll start at the top, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
All right. So the first question, ask about semi-rural character, and really essentially asking in question 1, do you agree that preserving the semi-rural character of Cherry Hills Village should remain a key part of the vision for the village? And then ask a follow-up question, kind of open-ended about individuals' definition of the term semi-rural character. So, and this came out of comments from various folks in the group along the way, and some discussion in the recent weeks here about really being upfront and asking that vision question about semi-rural character. So I'll open it up for comments on the overarching themes here.
I did a little research. That is, I opened the dictionary to find out the precise meaning of semi and rural. Semi, as I'm sure we all know, means half of the whole. It means incomplete or partially complete. Rural is open land, often called the country. It's characterized by simplicity and lacking of sophistication. That comes from the big dictionary, and I could have gone on, but I think that you might tuck those terms away and see if, if they offer some direction to what we think is semi-rural.
And I think that's a good starting point. I think our task, though, really is to figure out how to get the citizens to describe semi-rural and see if there's any consensus that emerges.
Uh-huh.
I think that would be useful because I think in some instances, people will define semi-rural as the absence of, I don't know, cars on blocks or something else. People are more inclined to tell you what they don't like in a question like this than what they do like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that is what we want to do, is find out what people think, but it starts up, the highest level is, and we might not want to ask, we may want to just stick with it by asking semi-rural, which then sort of fosters that. Is there a better term to describe it than semi-rural? Or is semi-rural it? And then you drop down to where we are now, which is, okay, if semi-rural is it, how do you define it? And quite frankly, Alex Brown, I thought, had a good discussion on that, which is, what are the characteristics or features that you most associate with semi-rural? In other words, we're trying to get them, and you probably won't get a lot because most people like check the box, but to the extent we can get as many people as we can to provide definitional or characteristic type terms, that's what we want to do. But the first level, though, is semi-rural the right term? And again, it may be, we may not even want to question that or have them to discuss that. If it is, then the next thing is, whatever term we're using, how do you characterize that? What are the characteristics of that we want to do?
After reading those, after putting that definition together, I looked at the pictures, and immediately before I reminded myself what semi-rural means, I looked at the picture of the above ground wires, and was that semi-rural, or do you bury them? And I remembered, part of this definition talks about the country, but we're not the country, we're half of the semi-rural. When we lived in Yakima, Washington, which is really the country, if there were wires up, if there were electricity poles and all that sort of stuff in the country, that was a source of pride. We have access to television. We can use our computers. We've got, and so it sort of goes with the person who's looking and asking and wondering.
Mr. Chair, if I just may add a little flavor to this, I think when we were having discussions at a staff and consultant level, I think we really thought of this question and the two options for the next question as a package. So this isn't the only time. We're really trying to whet the appetite, get people to start thinking about the concept with this question, letting them start to write in, their ideas. And I would agree, they probably will write in negative things first, but nonetheless, we set the table with this question. I really think it works well, though, with the next question, and there's options with the next question. But I would encourage you to kind of look at these as a package and see if, to be honest with you, you could eliminate question 1 altogether, because we attempt to start to jump into semi-rural with the second question. We felt, however, that this was a nice, sort of a softer intro into one of the biggest topics this plan has to answer.
To respond to that, Chris, I sort of agree. I will say, I think you're leading the witness on question 1. I think I agree you could do without it, but there's been a lot of debate. What is semi-rural? Rural? Are we, how is that different? I've also looked at semi-urban and definition of that. along the same lines. But in here, to me, you're leading it by saying we're semi-rural. So now what is your opinion of it?
Right.
And I go to what you said, Chris. Question 2, I think, does it. I'm not sure you need question 1 to start.
A modification may address Bill's concern. I mean, I think I understand what you're saying about leading the witness, but it also has to do with the history of the village and what everybody thinks the village is or should be. And it was in the previous master plan. So I don't think you want to ignore it, but
Not at all.
maybe what you say after, what is your definition, semi-rural character? And I like Earl's idea of please list the characteristics, and then follow that by, if you don't think semi-rural character is important, what would you suggest in its place? And give an open-ended question there and let them tell us.
So if I'm hearing this right, we would in essence eliminate the strongly agree through strongly disagree portion of it and just say the previous plan indicated that was the vision for the community. What is your definition of this vision? And if that is not your vision, what is it?
Yeah, I don't know if you need to take out the strongly agree, strongly disagree, other than if you disagree, what do you think should be substituted for semi-rural character? But those are kind of technical points.
Sure.
Anyway. I think it's a good place to start. It's a big issue, and it's a subject that gets everybody excited.
I would agree with you on that point, Chairman, because certainly the term semi-rural in the past has been invoked over and over and over again, whether it's for a subdivision approval or something else. Not necessarily within the context of P&Z, but I'm talking back over the last 20, 25 years. This business of semi-rural or the term semi-rural has certainly been used extensively.
Absolutely. And that's why it'll be critical to, in my view, to take this now to the next level, which is to figure out ways to define the characteristics. If that's what we stick with, and whatever we stick with, what are those characteristics? Definition is a fine word, but I don't know that, we're going to get there. It's like, we need to have an idea of what we're talking about, which then that input of those characteristics are what we utilize then to help define it ourselves and put out there for the community. Because right now, and as David said, people use that however they want. I mean, it's just a term out there, and they interpret it any way they want to anytime they come before council or P&Z or wherever they're coming to get what they want. And we need to start to have an idea of what is it we're really talking about here, if this is going to be used as a guiding principle.
We can make that change.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else on question 1? Okay. Chris already teed up question 2, in which there's essentially 2 options here. It's for a character question. The first option is a visual preference type question where you have a couple options for each component: public utilities, local streets, fencing, lighting, basically the elements of character, or a lot of the major elements of character. And the second option is a traditional survey question on page 4 of your handout that asks about the various elements that could be enhanced or preserved to provide for the semi-rural character of Cherry Hills Village, and asks people to select from 1 to 5 for each item, with 1 meaning should not be enhanced or preserved, and 5 meaning absolutely should be enhanced or preserved. So it allows for a certain degree of prioritization between the 2 elements. So it mentions potential undergrounding of utilities, improving the character of local streets, fencing, dark skies, light pollution, preserving open space, and historic properties. I also will note that we were careful to mention first couple options on that Q2, special assessments or fees for funding of underground utilities and improving the character. So we're not just opening up a wide open, if you had unlimited money. We're trying to set the table that there's financial ramifications and cost to some of these elements. So those are two major choices. The first one obviously is more visual. The second one is a little bit more into details, obviously, but it's essentially two ways to approach this topic.
When
Yeah,
you,
sorry.
could I just ask a clarify, when you remove overhead utilities and put them underground, does that necessarily assume that you'll be taking down trees and other indicia of rural Colorado, trees and typical plant growth and shrub growth?
I would love to hear what Britt says to this, but my feedback to you would be that there are certainly through the undergrounding process, there might be some individual landscaping that might be affected, but I think the long-term view would be that actually undergrounding would allow for a larger canopy. The utility companies have easements around those wires and they are draconian. I don't know if you've been seeing the work that's been happening on Hamden. They do not get permits, ask permission. They cut and remove first. And so I think the argument can be made that long-term you're increasing the landscaping by undergrounding utilities.
Yeah, I would concur. Short-term, there could be some impacts to vegetation and trees in a right away from underground utilities, but the overall intent is that long-term it becomes more of a natural look because they're the same encumbrances.
Mhm.
The undergrounding of utilities is a well-received idea for the most part. The one hazard you have with it, though, is when they're underground, it's out of sight, out of mind. And you can wind up with property owners who may adjoin a right-of-way, et cetera, pushing the limits on the location of landscape improvements. Yeah, we have permit requirements and all that jazz, but you just look at things today where there are utility wires. I mean, East Quincy is a good example, east of Holly, and how much the local vegetation interfaces with existing utility lines. And there have been complaints, I believe, in the last year where public services minions have gone in there and said, okay, we're going to clean out some of this stuff. And the trees look like they've been gone after with the meat axe. Providing as long as you can assure that public utilities will remain in existing rights of way and adjoining property owners are kept well aware of where the limits are, I think it'll work out. But my experience with regulation and keeping an eye on these things, particularly say with the sanitation district, we have sewer mains where people have planted trees straight over the line. You know, oh, I didn't know it was there. Okay, but it's still there. So I think this question has to be nuanced at least slightly. We are in favor. Are you in favor of going underground? Okay, be aware that there are constraints with it. In addition, there was the village's experience with the underground task force. I don't remember whether Earl was on it or not.
Yeah.
But public service, or Excel as the case may be, is not real enthusiastic about undergrounding power lines. Their primary objection is if something goes wrong and it's underground, you can't see where it is. You have to test, and it increases restoration time, etc.
Right.
So and I think that's a valid point. Being someone who's partially undergrounded and partially aerial, I can see the hazards of it. So when you ask a question like this, like I say, problem needs to be nuanced to the point where people are aware that this just isn't a free ride aesthetically.
So I think those are all good points. but we have to really get at the visual. I mean, there's a practical and a public safety issue associated with undergrounding the utilities, but I think our question is really, what do people like visually and what's consistent with what they want to see in the village? And, you know, my opinion is underground or above ground is not a semi-rural question. I think you see utilities all over the place, no matter where you are in the country or in the city. I don't think it really applies to the semi-rural question, but that's just my opinion. I would like to see, if we do these pictures, we say, you know, is it the one on the right or the one on the left, or is it neither? Because I think you're really trying to pigeonhole people by giving them a choice of one or the other. And
I think that speaks to a good discussion topic. You know, there's two different approaches laid out for you. There could be additional approaches that weren't included in your packet. Big picture, we can, you know, if there's additional subtopics that you want to see added or deleted, or different wording or different pictures, please send those to us. But
yeah,
from a conceptual perspective, is the commission more comfortable with these pictures giving people an idea, or do we want to just sort of in a written format list the kinds of characteristics that we're attempting to define?
Chris, I have a question on that. Is there some reason we can't do both?
You certainly could do both. I would personally, I would recommend against it in an effort to keep you're sort of using a valuable question on something that might be somewhat duplicative of the other question.
I think a comment that I'd make about, and particularly using these two right here that we're looking at, and again, I could be wrong about this. I guess there's an arguable point. But with regard to overheading, you know, undergrounding utilities, I actually don't know anybody other than maybe when Dory was saying, hey, people in the country want to know, hey, we've got utilities. I don't know of anybody that doesn't want the picture on the right. Everybody will say they want that picture. It's a question of whether they're willing to pay for it or not. Okay, for that one. Then one below, with regard to, do you want curved streets or not curved streets? I don't know what people would say about that. I think that actually would be an interesting question, and they're different. The top one, I know what they're going to say. I mean, they're going to say they want the picture on the right. The question is, are you willing to pay for it? The one on the bottom actually gets to kind of a preference, and I don't know what people would say about that. Those are two different things at the end of the day. And the bottom one really doesn't have a lot to do with cost, although cost would be involved. The top one's got everything to do with cost.
So Earl, would it if we added some of the language that's in the second question regarding overhead utilities as context with the visual preference surveys, would that help address the concern that you have? Well, as you can tell, hopefully, we've tried to be mindful throughout about the idea of not just having these questions ask open-ended, free checks for everybody. But it is hard at an early stage to pin people down when we're trying to, you know, ask for big picture concepts.
Right.
So again, if folks have a preference of the pictures or the written, we would love to know so we could start zeroing in on that. And again, once we then know which direction, we can hear from you individually about, we don't like this picture, or, hey, you guys forgot about some other topic that, you know, subtopic within this that we didn't include.
The problem that I have with the pictures is I think they're easily misinterpreted.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned that people are going to be looking at different things in the photo and making a decision based on something that's not quite what you were after.
I have that same problem. This is Dory.
Then the question is, would you prefer a strategy like Chris suggested of keeping pictures and adding a little more qualitative discussion or description, basically integrating the two options, or is it better to go with the second route, which is a bit more cut and dry in terms of words?
Well, and I agree with what I had a problem with most of the pictures for the interpretive reasons that the others have mentioned. Other than, you know, that curb street versus uncurbed, I actually felt that was a really, that really gets to the heart of, if we want to talk about semi-rural or rural. That would be really interesting to see what people think. I kind of know what I think they think about the others, and they wouldn't even be thinking about rural or semi-rural or urban. But that one about the curved streets and the uncurbed streets, I think would really be interesting to see what people thought about that. And I'm not saying therefore we should have pictures. I'm just saying out of all of these, that's the one where I thought I have no idea how that would come back.
There's that. There's also the fact that if you say a curb street versus an uncurbed street, I think for some people, if they're not really sure what you're talking about, if you give them the picture, which shows the example, I think it makes it a lot easier for them.
I agree with you, David. I also think, you know, it's going to vary depending on who lives where, because different neighborhoods have different
Oh, yeah.
applications. And when I saw it, to your point, Earl, it was like, you know, it got me thinking about another neighborhood, but not mine.
Right.
There's a note in here that says for question 2, I think it's for option 2, it says that you would include photos along with the ranking of the questions. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, that was written in there, and that's true. So, yeah, with a second option, we could have images along there as well. It's just not simply the choice A versus B.
Why don't you guys see if you can combine them together in a way that makes sense and makes it more interesting and more useful to get the feedback that way?
Okay.
I think what I'm hearing is a little bit more text and context.
Yeah.
With the question 2 that provides the trade-offs, but the one subtopic that we might still go ahead and include as pictures, and maybe it's its own standalone question, because if you'll notice after these, we have standalone questions on character related to lighting.
Right.
And so maybe the street is just its own standalone question with pictures.
Okay, well, you guys want to play around with that and come back with something?
And again, if any commissioners have any specific additional context that you'd like to see in those version 2 of question 2, please, email us your thoughts.
Okay. All right, very good. Let's move on to question 3 if everybody's comfortable.
Right. As Chris mentioned, we have some additional questions that are more specific to different topics. This one's on lighting, and it's a fairly straightforward question. Are you in support of maintaining dark sky regulations to limit light pollution in the village? Yes, no, I don't know, and it leaves room for a comment as well.
The reason we included pictures on this one is it gets to the concept Earl's talking about from a vague, fuzzy perspective. Who's going to say no to dark skies? Sounds great, sure. When they want to do something to their house, however, and they get told that they can't use the certain fixtures that they like, it turns into a different conversation. And I think the reason we included the pictures that we did, these are great choices because we get the bottom, especially the bottom left, that Boston fixture all the time. And there are ways that folks can have that fixture if it's gas lit or if it's decorative, and what's decorative is we can talk for hours on that. Let's not. But the bigger picture point is, are you in support of dark skies if you're limited to the types of choices you have on your house?
Well, I think, hey, Chris, I think we need to discuss here, though, the downlighting versus not downlighting, because that's really what the difference is in these fixtures, right? The upper 2 direct light down and help keep the sky dark, and the other 2 broadcast light in multiple directions. Don't we need to address that specifically?
So I will tell you a major frustration that folks have is that it might have a cover on top that keeps light from going above. I'm gesturing here. I hope everybody can see.
Yeah.
But the code actually technically requires it to be not only covered, but also shielded
Right.
so that you cannot see the direct source from adjacent properties or the right of way. And so people get frustrated to say, that's not dark skies. That's just, you know, that's going too far. That's not doing anything to contribute to light escaping into the Milky Way, right? That's just trying to prevent a complete saturation of the area, and people get frustrated with that, the shielding aspect of it. And so, you know, notice on the lower right-hand corner version of the light fixture that's not allowed, it is completely covered on top. And there are jurisdictions out there that would call that dark sky compliant.
Okay.
Fair
Well,
enough.
I think people need, I think a more of an explanation needs
Okay.
to.
Chris, I think you did a good job just saying that, and I would add that to the question.
Sure.
The shield's a good point.
Yeah.
And just augment the question with that aspect. I think people just need to be very clear on what the policy is.
Exactly. And what the rationale for the policy is.
Mhm.
And you know, as you're Bill, as you're talking about that, you know, the dark sky policy is a much broader concept than just light fixtures that go on the outside of your house.
Sure.
It has huge implications on athletic facilities, recreational facilities, you know, some of our parks, street lighting. So, you know, it isn't just these 4 fixtures in this survey. I think the reason you're seeing these 4 is because this is the manifestation of the policy that gets the most attention.
Yeah.
Under the existing, excuse me, existing code, Chris, you made the comment that you do not see the source of the light from adjoining rights of way or property or other properties. Yeah, that might be true on the for lights on the outside of a building. But if somebody has a fairly open corridor up to their house, you can certainly see the light on in the room.
1000%. Yes.
Particularly if the house for some reason is higher than the street. So where I understand the business with the dark skies, but people might get confused on something like that, you know, saying, wait a minute, do I have to shade the lights inside my house now
That's
too?
right. Commissioner, you are so spot on. To add to that, as you know, there are certain regulatory advantages if folks use breezeways to connect various components of their residence. And it's extremely popular for those breezeways to be enclosed, often with floor to ceiling glass. Those, they're beacons. And when you compare them to the light fixtures that people sometimes are not allowed to have, it really does cause some teeth gnashing. So I think what I'm hearing is that we should add some of the broader policy aspects of this that help provide a little bit more context as to the choices that people really have with this topic.
Exactly.
I think that's an important comment. Yeah.
So that kind of plays into, I just have a question. So the answer, I don't know, I need to learn more. What happens if somebody answers that? Chooses that as an answer? Is there
Michael Mayer calls them.
there's a learn more option?
Yeah.
I just think we didn't want to box people in more than
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah. No, I was just curious because if I answered that way, then I guess it's on myself to go learn more. But if we're putting more context into the question, then I think that helps with that.
That helps. And they also can add a comment about what they don't know, what they don't understand. Okay, anything else on question 3? Go ahead, Brett.
Okay, question 4, as you can see, fairly straightforward in terms of its setup. Would you be in favor of the village raising funds through taxes or fees to support ongoing public art installations in Cherry Hills Village. And we had not provided any images for this question, given that the topic of public art is so very qualitative and subjective. We'd want to pollute the question with specific images from the village of public art, essentially.
Well, I wouldn't put any images in there. I don't know how I would answer that question. I'm in favor of public art and paying for it, but I don't like much of what has been installed so far. So what, you know,
In,
That-
in
how
the,
does-
in
that's
the
kind-
overall scheme of things, is public art a large issue as compared, say, to the lighting issue or the semi-rural character? Or the
Does it-
even undergrounding of utilities?
so you're saying, does it even deserve its own question?
Uh,
You're suggesting that.
Given there are what, maybe three spots in the village where there is quote, public art, close quote, Village Center, Happy Canyon, Holly and Bellevue, anyplace else? How many
Well-
people, other than the aficionados of public art, even notice it? Whereas when you're driving along Quincy, if the utilities are underground, this is going to affect people's perceptions. I don't know how much public art integrates with some of the other issues which have been addressed here. The other ones, I think you can string them all together and it makes some sense. Public art is kind of out there.
Well,
And I think that that's a fair comment. I mean, in relative undergrounding of utilities to public art, but public art does generate a lot of opinions. And a lot of people have different views about it. And in fact, there's another level in addition to just through taxes or fees to public art, period. Whether if public art could be distributed throughout the city or throughout City Hall. And by the way, there's a fair amount of public art in City Hall. And the plan is to keep that in there and put more in. There's a question of, hey, do you favor public art if you don't have to pay for it? And how do you feel about it if you do through taxes or fees? So there's that other level of question that's in there at that point in time. But it goes to exactly what Mike was saying. I mean, you know, there are some people that don't like art at all. And then there are people saying, no, I like it. I just don't like that art. And that gets to the whole issue, the controversy that comes up. So,
well, and a corollary to that, Earl, is somebody donates a large piece of art and you don't have to pay for it, but nobody likes it, or most people don't like it.
right.
How do you deal with that?
It's tough. That's a difficult one.
I recognize that art, I guess, is in the eye of the beholder. Maybe that's more true in this discussion, but we have an arts commission. I think it's a fair and good question. And I would support keeping a question about public art in this survey.
We do have a guest with us tonight, Emily with Parks Trails. She is on the call with us, helping us technically, but I'm going to call on her, Emily, if that's okay.
Sure.
Do you have any context for the commission as it relates to PTRC and any conversations that have been had? You've been around here longer than I have.
Yeah, I would
public
say for this, I think it's a helpful question to have both for the Arts Commission and for PTRC. We do have, I am just scrolling through the website. We are going to have, once we have the City Hall sculpture installed, 9 pieces of public art outside right now. And I think this is an important question to have for both of the commissions. I think, you know, it adds to public spaces and parks. So I think it would be helpful to have a read on this from the whole community.
I know we've talked about PTRC having some real serious back and forth on this topic. And, you know, I think my thought after hearing that was that some additional community guidance might really be a benefit to those decision-making bodies.
Yes, for sure.
I'd like to add that in the last, I think it's maybe 6 months, the Arts Commission has added Susan Cooper to its leadership. Susan is an internationally known public artist and is involved with the public art at the RTD stations in downtown, and her art and her eye are just way ahead of anything that we put in before her. So it's to me, I feel very, very positive about continuing the public art program with that kind of expertise on the panel. Not that the other panel wasn't okay, but this is really a step up with her. And her work is now at the Village Center, those plexiglass, all color pieces. And she would make herself available to planning and zoning and everything else because she's both a longtime resident of Cherry Hills Village and really committed to see public art become a real feature of the village.
Mr. Chair, the last thing on this that I want to make sure that we have clear direction from the commission on is the fact that we're recommending that we have no Cherry Hills Village, pictures of Cherry Hills Village public art. If only so that it doesn't bias the answer if we happen to pick one that is not one of the respondents' favorites.
I think that's a good idea.
I concur.
I concur.
I would
And I think,
suggest,
excuse me, I think Susan would open up to that concurrence as well. Recognizing that it's public art and that's an important, that's it. You respect the community.
and the selection process, I think, is an important component of this. And I wonder if that should be addressed in the question, or at least have a space at the bottom that says, please provide additional comments on public art. I would make a comment on how it gets selected. And I'm not trying to be critical. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying the selection process is almost equally as important as whether you like art or not.
Yeah, maybe there's an opportunity to add another few lines for folks to fill in additional thoughts on the topic.
Right.
So you're thinking, Mike, a process that involves something other than, because right now, the Art Commission does their work, they talk amongst themselves, they get whatever input they get, and then they make a recommendation to council. Council decides and approves it and goes from there. Are you thinking, hey, we might need to have broader input from the community before we did something like that?
That or maybe the works of art are limited in terms of how long they're on display. And so they get rotated out, in and out more often, which would help address the issue of some people don't like that art and some people like other art, and the subjectivity component.
Right, and that latter point, I think, happens from the Art on Loan program, and so I think that is a good point.
Yeah.
The former, if it was more the former, you're right, that's basically a way to kill the art program if you didn't like it. I mean, anything where all of a sudden you had to have a large group of people agreeing on it, basically. Wouldn't happen.
Okay.
We'll work on it.
But the latter point, I think is, the latter question, I think is important.
Okay.
All right. Anything else on art? If not, we'll move on to housing.
All right. Housing is could be a very spicy topic here. As you can read here, it asks for your favorability and ranking from 1 to 5 for different types of housing types within the village. Accessory dwelling units, patio homes or townhomes, apartments or condominiums, 2 different types of senior options, independent living options, and also assisted living and nursing options. And then also has an option for other where people can put their own information on that. So really the question is, for this initial survey, how much we want to get into the topic of housing and choices for housing. And then the corollary question is, do we want to have associated pictures? We found pictures here that we thought were fairly benign and safe here, but it may be just like art, you want to stay away from any images. So I want to take your temperature on really the topic of housing, whether it should go into this upfront survey and how we should approach it here as this example.
I did have one question. When the wording you used, accessory dwelling unit, was that on purpose? I mean, I think in the code, but I'm not certain. I
It's
didn't
in
know
the
that.
code.
What, so dwell in an access as opposed to an accessory structure? Because I know we have issues with regard to accessory structures, but does it say accessory dwelling structure?
No,
Well-
it calls them guest houses. I think the reason that accessory dwelling unit is used here is because in some ways it's a standardized term used on far more than just Cherry Hills Village.
Right.
Actually, City and County of Denver is going through a fairly contentious process to allow accessory dwelling units, ADUs, as you'll see them called in the Denver Post, on a huge scale as a way to address affordability. What we do not allow in Cherry Hills Village is an accessory dwelling unit that is that you could pay money to rent. You can have a guest house for family members or friends, but no rent can be exchanged.
Okay, why don't we add that to the list though, because that's a hot topic as well.
Well, I think that to go further on Chris's point, to incorporate, if possible, to incorporate into the question, what is currently allowed in Cherry Hills? People may not know whether
Yes.
That's true.
accessory units are allowed, and if so, in what zones. I don't think they're allowed in R5, but they are allowed in R1. But I don't know the details there. But if you can incorporate that into the question itself, I think it might be useful.
Well, actually,
I like that.
all of these choices are not allowed currently. So maybe what we can do is provide more context in the question itself to suggest that the only allowable housing type allowed is a single family detached dwelling.
Yes,
And therefore, would you be open to additional types of residential as seen below?
I like
And-
that, Chris.
In order to avoid confusion, though, since there are guest houses or caretaker places, and I don't know, for example, how that has been worked out at Quincy in Colorado, the Gilman property, because you got the bunker, which was built a couple of years ago, but then they're building a whole new structure as well. So is one of those considered a guest house or what?
The application of that on a case-by-case basis can raise some questions that, do have to be worked through and sort of administered.
I think on that property, is it not true, Chris? I think on that property, that's actually 2 separate or 3 separate parcels.
It's my understanding that there's lot lines dividing those. They may be
Exactly.
owned by the same
Right.
property owners, but
Right.
there are lot lines that help allow. that
Okay,
to happen.
well, then they must have added those lot lines because because once upon a time, that was just one piece.
correct.
Yeah, I
So-
think, but to the commissioner's point, I do think we could add a little bit more context in there suggesting what's allowed today. Single
Right.
family
Well-
detached dwellings and guest houses not available for rent. Would you be open, how open would you be to all of these other things?
Right, because
Well-
otherwise I think you're likely to get the question, well, what about this, this property located at XYZ? It has a guest house or an accessory use.
No, that's
Yeah,
a good point.
context, so that people know what you're talking about.
Yeah, we don't want to get hung up on, them thinking of, their neighbor and, getting into the weeds themselves. We're trying to ask big picture questions. Do we want to change policies to allow for new types?
Yes,
Good point. Good point.
Chris, I just wasn't sure if the group knew that guest houses per our code right now are only allowed in R1 and R2.
Mhm. Yes.
I mean, I think if we're looking at context and, get people looking at their neighbor's property properties and all this stuff. I mean, that's an important distinction somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And I assume that they cannot be rented to unrelated parties.
They can't be rented at all, even
Right.
if they're related.
Okay, so I think that's a question we should put in here as well.
That's an additional question.
No, just say ADUs for rent.
Oh, okay.
That's what this is. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, we should absolutely add more context and description to that.
Clarify that.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah, we'll do
Good.
that. Okay.
this is an exciting question.
What is the current code matter though? Because we had this in front of P and Z a couple of years ago about this whole business of short-term versus long-term rentals.
Mhm.
Good,
but
good question.
That
my
provision actually cites accessory dwelling unit. That is the only, by search, provision in the code that references accessory dwelling units.
And I believe the guest house section, and I can't prove this, but my suspicion is the guest house limitations on not allowing any guest house usage for rent is really a reaction to the short-term rental issue that came up. in an
Right,
effort to
because
avoid
this
that.
was primarily a piece of, or added to the code, I would say in reaction to the proliferation of outfits like Airbnb.
And some related protection.
Yeah.
And so maybe we even talk about the fact that accessory dwelling units are for long-term occupation or something like that, that keeps people from getting hung up on Airbnb.
Right, because I didn't recall that. I mean, and that was while I was on council and the short-term rental thing. And I didn't recall the accessory dwelling unit aspect being impacted by that, but because in fact, long-term rentals are allowed in Cherry Hills. It's just short-term rentals aren't.
Earl, if you've got additional memories on that specific topic, we have had another discussion going on unrelated to this. I would love a chance to chat with you about that if we get the chance. At
Sure.
another time.
Yep, no problem.
I have a comment on the question of pictures. And I think there are so many different types of architecture for these different housing types that I'm worried that people are going to react visually to a townhouse that they think is ugly when they might like another townhouse of a different design.
And they will.
And because that's the way people react to pictures, is they react instantaneously. I think I would take the pictures out, but
Yeah, I was about to ask that question, whether you all thought pictures were valuable. We did make an attempt to provide pictures that were contextually more relevant to really the setting of Cherry Hills Village, but inevitably you're never going to find a perfect picture.
Right.
right.
But
I agree with
you know,
Mike. I think Mike has a good point there.
Brett and Brett can speak to this as well, but we struggled just getting these. I mean,
Right.
it you know, you start thinking about people's preconceived ideas and it's just, it's a little bit of a rabbit hole that could distract folks.
Right. And really the pictures we have for assisted living really doesn't show anything for the housing. It's just
Right, exactly.
people.
Yeah.
So I think we can take these out.
Okay.
Elliot,
Okay, ready for the next one?
yes, we're ready for multimodal transportation. Elliot has been patiently waiting here. And Elliot, we were thinking that it would be fruitful to provide an opening question tied to transportation below this next one that would gauge the overall level of satisfaction with the multimodal transportation system in the village, as opposed to diving into the details here. So question 6 speaks to that, asking people to rate the quality of the following types of travel: driving to the streets, driving arterials, walking, biking, equestrian transit, with a ranking system similar to the other questions that we have provided. And these pictures here really are just for background or context. I would say, as opposed to these other categories we've looked at, these images probably shouldn't really drive the answers as much. They're more just to have some graphical breaking up of the survey, really. Elliot, anything to add? Elliot, are you there?
He's muted.
He's muted. Okay.
Sorry, I haven't done that in several weeks. Yeah, What Britt said is just right. We just thought a intro question on kind of the pulse of people on how the village is doing now.
I think it's a good question. I like it. But the one thing is that, and I don't know where the number is, you know, is it 1 and 2? But the point is if they're saying, hey, it needs improvement, I think we should encourage, if not require, saying how.
Yeah.
Just saying it needs
Yeah.
improvement doesn't do anything for us. We need to know why do you think this needs improvement?
Makes sense.
That's a great comment.
Yeah, that's good. We can add some space for additional comments in that regard.
Yeah, I think the intent of the next, 4 questions is kind of to get at that. So it could be that we could do an open-ended question at the end of the whole transportation section or at the end of the first question, but maybe we can get back to that as we go through the other questions.
Right.
Hey, Dave.
So
Let's
if you're
move on to
okay,
the next one.
Chairman Lemaire, we'll go on to question 7. So again, really it's,
I applied for one. Yeah, you applied directly.
Ethan,
through
can you mute
SBA.
Chairman Lemaire for us? There we go.
it's on a side discussion. So question 7 does get into different ideas here for people walking, biking, or riding horses. So, and this gets into some of the detail option choices that were discussed in our last call with you back in May. So ideas like separating bike and ped trails from vehicular traffic, additional trails and street rights of way, outside the rights of way, dedicated paths for equestrian or pedestrian traffic only with no bicycles, on-street bike routes, additional sidewalks. So these pictures, I would argue these pictures probably should stay, even if they're not the most perfect pictures necessarily for Cherry Hills Village, just to give an idea of what we mean by these terms, because usually non-transportation planners a lot of times don't know these terms or they get confused. Elliot, would you agree?
Yeah, especially kind of the separated versus not separated kind of things.
Right. So, this is a question and an overarching comment on these questions. You may, out of this whole process here for the initial survey, you may come out of this and say, well, we like this question or this question, maybe save them for the next one. If you decide to do that, these questions aren't necessarily going to be, thrown in the trash can. They could be saved for the second round of survey questions once we get into more detail in the master plan. That's one option you could choose as opposed to keeping them here. I'm not saying you have to do that, but that's something to think about. And Chair Lemaire was the one who I think this question and the next one wanted to delve a little bit more into how you use the right of way and the choices for what different streets may look like. So hopefully he can rejoin us here in a second.
I think he's back,
Okay.
but you're muted, Mike.
Thank you. I like all of these. I'm sorry, what was the question though, Brett?
The question for you?
Yeah, did you have a question?
Oh, I just mentioned that you were one of the folks in the last call who mentioned specifically talking about choices for within the right of way, choices within different streets. So this kind of speaks to that comment of the last session. So it sounds
I'm involved in a lot of this in downtown Denver, and it doesn't necessarily apply here, but they always like to talk about a hierarchy of uses. And the idea is the car has been primary since it was invented, but there's a desire now, at least among urban planners, to put pedestrians and equestrians and out here equestrians and bike riders in Denver on equal footing with a car. I don't know if that concept needs to be talked about, or maybe that comes in the next survey.
I'll just chime in on that a little bit as somebody who's participated, especially in some of the downtown Denver efforts. The hierarchy of transportation in that context has provided a great deal of hand-wringing and conflict.
Yeah.
I would argue that we don't have as many options or choices for that type of discussion, simply because we don't have a lot of the right-of-way available for multiple options with, increased access to, bike path. Are we going to have it be use an additional lane of traffic? Well, we don't have an additional lane of traffic in most cases, in all cases. So I would urge you not to dive into that. It's almost a rabbit hole, if you will, of ideas and concepts that can really, that almost would be its own conversation. If you
I don't think it's, I agree, Chris. I don't think it's important out here. I just thought I'd toss it out for what it's worth.
I don't know if Ellen or Britt have any additional thoughts, but
I would concur in terms of, downtown Denver, most streets in Denver really have a lot more room to manage different choices for different modes here. And in Cherry Hills Village, I think it's really perhaps more of a discussion about balancing different modes, not having a hierarchy, but maybe the term balance is better.
Yeah. I don't think it needs to be a hierarchy. I do think we have a lot of unused right-of-way, though, that could be put to better use, accommodating different things than we do now. Quincy has room for an equestrian trail. Mansfield has room for a gravel trail on the north side, or a pedestrian trail. It's got a bike lane on the south side. I think using the existing right-of-way in more efficient, multifaceted ways is a really exciting opportunity in the village.
Okay. Any other comments, discussion from the group?
With respect to Quincy as an example, however, if you want, okay, let's say you want to do a separate equestrian trail, which presumably then goes on the north side of Quincy.
On the south side, right, on the grassy strip there, which is where they ride anyway.
Except you got a bunch of, well, I guess in segments you do, but you do have trees in there too. I mean, what I'm getting at is, if you think of the area in front of Kent Denver, yeah, you got a grassy strip, but you have the trees, and then you have the ditch.
Right.
And
but
you don't want some of these well, I would not favor seeing these trails placed in a position where they could interfere with some kind of public infrastructure, such as a drainage ditch.
Right.
In addition to the fact that for an equestrian, this might, be a hazard of soft ground, because you don't know which, you wouldn't know from one day to the next whether the footing is good there, or whether it rained the night before and now it's mushy or something like that. Then that sets you up for all kinds of liability issues too. So, maybe you need some kind of qualifier in there saying, where feasible.
Yeah.
Your point on unused right of way, yeah, I concur with you on a number of places. There probably is, but you'd need some refinement and a thorough inventory to determine some kind of feasibility, I would think. Of course, I suppose if unless you get an overwhelming response here saying, yeah, we want it, maybe that's something that could be moved down the list anyway.
Well, I think those are good comments. That comes in more, I think, in the practical implementation, but
okay.
But those things definitely need to be considered. If it doesn't work in certain locations, it doesn't work. But I think we should take a look at it. I think we should encourage Public Works to take a look at kind of repurposing the existing right-of-way to an extent, or adding to it, or enhancing it. Those are details for City Council to work out. Right, Earl?
I agree.
So if you got any specific edits on that question, just go ahead and send them our way.
Ready for question 8?
Staying with question 7 for a minute.
Sure.
Run it up the flagpole and see what you get, and then you go from there. So I would not add a whole lot to it.
I think it's pretty good.
Good with it.
Sounds good.
Question 8 touches upon the very key topic of cut-through traffic. So kind of harkening back to the previous discussion in May, instead of asking people if they want to do something to limit cut-through traffic or not, which would probably elicit a fairly straightforward response, actually putting forth some options for how that could be accomplished. So we have different choices here with the ranking system of 1 through 5, speed humps along streets, local streets, lowering the posted speed limits along streets to discourage cut-through traffic, doing strategies to move traffic to collector streets in order to reduce traffic on local streets, improving the flow on perimeter streets to reduce cut-through traffic, which arguably is probably somewhat limited in terms of what the village can do itself, but we still wanted that to be an option for discussion. And then in the default option of none of the above, I'd like to maintain the current access into the village on various streets. And the images just are pretty straightforward, illustrating the different strategies. And Elliot, feel free to chime in with any thoughts on this one. We're all vetted through Public Works, and with all these questions, by the way, been vetted not only by the consultant team, by Chris and Ethan, but also other city staff within the village.
Well, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't ask about roundabouts here. I don't want to start a civil war. I don't want to start a civil war, but why are we dancing around that question?
I wondered the same thing, Mike.
Yeah, I agree.
You need a lot of room for a roundabout. So it's not simply a intersection you're going to use, but you really need to have that room to make it effective.
Okay.
True, but it's a good question, I think, to pose. I think the questions are actually quite good, and I agree with Mike on the roundabout. I think that should be added. I'm not sure you need the photos. I don't know what they necessarily do. It's hard to see the speed bump that you're illustrating.
Yeah.
And the collector street, whatever, and the stop sign and the speed limit. I'm not sure you need those.
Well, and I don't think you need them either, although what I was curious about is lowering the posted street speed limits. Do we need to indicate that? I mean, basically Colorado, Quincy, Holly are 30 miles per hour. Every other one is 25. And when we just say lower them, are people likely to say yes, as opposed to going, okay, we're talking about 20 or 15. And then you get a different answer. Do people know what the speed limits are? And if you're saying you want to lower them, you know where they are and where they're going to go down to. I don't know. It seems like that would have an impact on the answer to that question.
Yeah, Earl, I actually spent some time looking at this question, and I think it's interesting. It's worded particularly like, do you want the village to explore these options? And I don't think it's pinpointing anything specifically, but I do think there is some room for that concept to get lost in this, that people might think this is actually something we're going to do, or we're going to change something, or what does it mean? And, like you'd have to do a traffic study. You could explore it all you want, and then it might not be justified, and then you can't do it anyway. So it's a tricky question from that perspective.
Because where this is getting to, and I kind of feel like Alex Brown's comment saying, or was that, I can't remember, what if somebody said, hey, I'm not exactly certain what to tell you, what to do here, but I know that there's an issue. And it's like, hey, do you want us to try to keep people out of the village that don't live here, period, which is very difficult to do because these are public streets? Or do you want us to keep cut through traffic on our collector streets, our through streets, and out of the suburbs? And how do you feel in terms of the impact of those with regard to the ability of villagers to move around the city? I mean, that really is the issue here at the end of the day. And I don't know what the questions are, or how to word them, or what to do, but that's it. And because we have people that come in and say, hey, they're coming through the neighborhoods, we don't want people in at all, versus, well, why wouldn't you want them on the main thoroughfares and out of the residences or the residential areas? And then people that are complaining that, you know, when we're back to normal, which is not now because you can get around easy now, but, you know, before COVID and with schools, and you run into the traffic issues that we run into at that point in time, and people complain about that. I'm not certain what questions or how many or the wording, but I know what the issue is.
Well, Earl, I wonder if that would be a good topic to take up in the second survey when you're getting into specific choices.
Sure, could be. I mean,
What's your thought on that, Brett?
I think it might be better for the later survey to get into specific choices. I think right now we're trying to take a general temperature on, you know, enthusiasm for different strategies here in general. And then later on, we want to get into more specific choices.
It sounds reasonable.
If we take out the photos, I didn't see language that said additional stop signs.
This is Emily. I was just about to chime in on that. I was gonna make sure we took that out because that's not, Public Works doesn't use stop signs as a traffic calming measure. So that should come out. The stop sign should come out even if the pictures stay.
Well, I think what happened was we got that feedback from Public Works. We took the narrative question out and just had not removed the picture yet to go along with it. So yeah, the stop sign question will come out. I'll just add a little flavor to this. You know, I thought Elliot did a great job of wording the option related to the improving the flow on perimeter streets to reduce cut through traffic. I think we could even add to that within interior Cherry Hills Village streets or something like that. Again, to Earl's point of helping people understand the trade-offs that you have to make. I have heard, not a ton, but from a few people who have bemoaned cut through traffic, and then said, and while we're talking about traffic, when are you guys going to do something about all that traffic on Hamden? You know,
And I-70.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? There are real choices to be made. And,
right.
You know, the idea that you just want it all to magically disappear is not a good use of this process. So I guess I appreciated Elliot's wording on some of these individual choices. I thought they helped move the ball down the field.
I agree. And let me just come back to one thing. It's sort of a 360. I agree with everybody that everything being equal, or the discussion about a roundabout is an appropriate question here. But I'm concerned that after what we went through and without having, and the biggest issue with that was the communication and education process that didn't occur appropriately. And I'm concerned that if we put that question in there, having come through what we came through and without doing any education or discussion of a more calm nature, all it's going to do is be overwhelmingly saying no. And maybe that's the right thing, but it eliminates a reasonable consideration of an option. And maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe there's a view that says, no, Earl, we need to have that in there because you're going to get way more answers saying positive. But and again, it's probably because of what I was involved in, and that was such a big issue that I just think that, boy, it would eliminate the opportunity for the community to truly consider on a calm, learned basis the opportunity for that. Anyway, I just throw that out. Just a
Okay.
thought.
Good thought. Are we ready for the next one?
Yes.
Question 9 is a more targeted question as well, asking folks interested in exploring different intersection improvements such as new turn lanes or traffic signals to reduce congestion at key internal intersections experiencing congestion, such as around schools in the village. And you basically can rank from highly interested down to uninterested, unsure, and you can also add a comment.
Here's a comment that I'd make with regard to, and there's a number of these coming in. I don't like interested under the right circumstances as a choice, unless you're saying, hey, describe those circumstances. Because I don't know what that means, and I don't know what the hell they're saying. And quite frankly.
About somewhat interested, since we have already somewhat uninterested.
Right.
We have that. We could just eliminate this as a choice.
Right.
Or unless you were gonna make them say, tell me what the circumstances, but otherwise, you driving people will pick that. Well, sure, I'm interested under the right circumstances, but what are they? Well, I don't know, but I'm interested.
Why don't you take that out and just say neutral?
That works.
That's good.
Okay.
It's a good one,
Britt,
Mike.
help me remember, did we have, was this the question that we had discussions about things to reduce the congestion at key internal intersections? Is this where we had a traffic circle listed?
I think that's where it would go, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
Right.
and I guess I'm just going to go ahead and say this for the record. I believe Jim Thorson requested that be taken out. From the perspective of feedback he's got from City Council about that topic being a little bit of a third rail. If P&Z really wanted to include some idea that is an option that we should explore with the community again, I will probably need to do some work on my side with Jim and maybe some City Council members on that approach.
I think you're right, Chris. I think that was one that was circulated through city staff and came back as one to reconsider. So I think you would need to run the channels around that option.
Again, my sense is that the city council members it is more of a third rail thing. Some of them from Jim is probably a bit more what I was talking about, which is, boy, if you really want to just never have to consider an option, throw that question out without any discussion. It's gone forever. That would be my guess.
You know, Chris, I think we need to be courageous, and it's a legitimate discussion point. And it got killed through politics, and it was awful and all that nonsense. I think you can't put down something that has a fair argument to it. It deserves its day. And the city council people are smarter, and they'll manage it better this time.
Let's hope.
To ask a somewhat impertinent question. Are traffic circles or roundabouts kind of the current flavor in moving traffic as opposed to having four-way stops, signalized intersections, etc.? I mean,
Yes, the answer to that is yes.
Okay, so 15, 20 years from now, people might be asking, why the hell did we do that?
I don't think so.
That might be a question for Elliot. Elliot, you've worked for 30, 40 years on this.
Yeah, I mean,
You've seen flavors come and go.
Flavors change for sure, but they've been around a long time and they've been doing nothing but accelerating, and people seem to be happier and happier with them. So there's always critics. Anytime there's a new one, there's always someone who yells and screams about pedestrians, and I wouldn't let my 17-year-old drive through there. There's always naysayers, but I'd say over the years the center of gravity has gotten much more favorable.
And it seems to me, this is as a average observer driving around different communities, it seems to happen more often when new communities are being planned. You know, like Aurora does it in many different locations. I saw some last weekend. I have seen fewer integrated into existing neighborhood fabric. Is that a fair statement, Elliot?
Are traffic or roundabouts generally more applicable to higher volume streets or lower volume?
Higher.
They move the traffic faster.
I think medium is the right answer. That there's, it's not going to work for Hamden or Bellevue or something. And for a small local street with very little traffic, you would do just a mini circle like that go through Greenwood Village kind of thing.
Yeah.
Go out to
Let's do-
Lowry.
Yeah, the interesting thing about it is, just as an aside, is that, you know, the reaction we got is that, hey, every traffic circle is like Columbus Circle in Manhattan.
Yeah.
As opposed to my first encounter with a traffic circle, which was a roundabout, I don't know, almost 40 years ago in Scotland. And when I came up to it, it's just this little thing, and I had to stop for sheep crossing the street. I mean, I'm going, hey, that ain't Midtown Manhattan. Let me tell you, they don't have sheep there.
That's true, but they also drive on a
Semi-rural.
different side of the road.
Well, that's true too.
But no, what comes to mind here is CDOT put in a roundabout at the Frisco exit from I-70 in hopes of not getting backups at that particular exit. That roundabout's been in there 4 or 5 years by now, and you still get the backups. Whereas where they did it in Vail, that seems to work a little better. And I just wonder whether this whole business of traffic circles has to be considerably considered in the context of its location. And I don't know how you quantify it.
True.
So that we don't get completely hung up on this, I'm just going to say I am hearing some interest in exploring the topic through the master plan process, whether or not we get it in this survey or not. Let me begin some conversations on my side with Jim and some city council members. This is not a topic or a discussion point at any part through this process that we would want to surprise city council with. So let me do some work on my side, if that's okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think, Chris, Bill's point is well taken. It's going to come up. It's going to come up in these open houses and other meetings, and I don't think omitting it in our survey is really going to accomplish anything in the long term as we go through this process. People are going to talk about it. They're going to want to talk about it, and it needs to be discussed.
I hear you loud and clear. I just want to communicate that feedback and that idea maybe before we take that first step with that conversation. That's I'm just trying to over communicate. Very rarely is that a bad thing. So
sounds good.
Hey, can I, this is Elliot, can I throw in one more comment on this? Like, for example, what if we were to add roundabout into the list, into the questions and such as, so it's not too in your face, so to speak. And then what if we have the add comment at the bottom? What if we put a little more structure to the add comment and say add comment on particular strategies that you like or don't like or something. So sort of give them an opportunity to say yes to the general concept, but yes, except no to this.
Sounds good to me. Chris?
that makes sense. I think that makes all the sense in the world.
Okay, you guys ready for question 10? So we're not here all night.
Right. So question 10 is somewhat related to an earlier question where it asked about the concepts within the village's right-of-way, at this time on key streets, Quincy, Holly, Clarkson, etc., ranking from not interested, somewhat uninterested. And I think on this one, we could change this one to be neutral instead of having the option of interested given the right circumstances, per the last time. Somewhat interested or very interested. So dedicated bike lanes, attached or separated, wider sidewalks, dedicated bridle or equestrian paths, landscape unions, or none of the above.
With this business of somewhat interested, very interested, etc., is it easier if you simply define those numerically and a person can answer it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
Yeah, we
Rather
can.
than actually having to write it in.
Sure.
That's a good point. I agree with you, David.
And actually that aligns with the rating structure we had earlier in the survey of 1 through 5. So that would be very congruent.
Good comment.
And we do have some images associated with this, essentially just showing images of the existing streets for context, which is somewhat useful. That image of Quincy, which Sherry Lemare was describing that area there, where you have some space on the south side. Clarkson is obviously shared with Inglewood. Our observation was that it's a very wide street. There's a lot of space there that could be used for different purposes, perhaps. We also add pictures of Holly if we need to. So reaction to this question, do you like the images or just want to take it out? What kind of feedback do you all have?
I think your Quincy image is good. I'm kind of indifferent, to be honest, with the images. I think Clarkson is not as strong. I think people understand Quincy, and there's, you know, that's more well-traveled.
I don't think they add significantly myself. People spend a lot of time driving and walking and bike riding. I think they have a pretty good sense of what these streets are right now, but I don't feel strongly that way myself.
May take those out.
All right.
Okay. Well, that's all the transportation questions, unless there's more comments in regard to question 10 or the group of transportation questions. And with that, Elliot, you're free to stay on, or if you want to adjourn and perhaps have dinner.
Good.
Thanks, Elliot.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elliot.
Yeah.
Okay. Now it's some parks and open space questions. Question 11 is, I believe the master plan update should focus on improving the quality of and access to the following parks and open space amenities. And there's a ranking system here for this one. Passive.
And actually, you mean rating system, right? You don't want to rank those. You want to rate those.
Yeah, rating. Good catch. Rating of 1 through 5. So for passive recreation parks, active recreational parks, of which the planned John Mead Park improvements fall in that category. Natural open spaces, public trails, and there's also room to add a comment. So we thought that it was important to ask the question about the quality of and the access to, and we combine those two into this one question.
I think these obviously are questions that need to be in there, and I didn't know, Mike, if you wanted to come back, but I mean, I do think Laura Crispin raised an important point with regard to this, which is, hey, we're asking people, you know, a lot of dough has been spent on Mead Park, which is changing that park substantially, and nobody's had a chance to see those opportunities that's going to afford. And so the question is, do we need to provide some context and some additional discussion about this, saying, hey, understand that Mead Park is going through this and this is what's going to be available now, talk about this, which then gets really wordy. So, but it's a fair point that we're asking them to talk about this. And I mean, a $2.5 million, $3 million update, which is going to include a lot of these things, is going in and no one's had a chance to see it yet.
Right.
And I think also, Earl, Quincy Farms falls into that category to a certain extent. Not a traditional park, but it will address certain community needs and interests that we're talking about here. And that is still a work in progress.
Yeah.
Well, there's a question further along, which has, where there's, I think, a staff recommendation that.
Yeah, there is a later question pertaining to Quincy Farm. Question 13, which you mentioned, yeah, city staff would recommend taking this out, and that, given that the master plan is currently in progress, it'd be confusing.
Right. Quincy Farm Master Plan.
Yes.
Right.
You want to talk about that now, or do you want to wait till we get?
No, we can get to it further, but the point as to whether Quincy Farm should be included in this question, which one was it, 11?
Question 11. Yes.
Yeah.
No,
So
I think that Laura's point was there's a lot of unknowns with regard to Mead Park.
Right.
And therefore, maybe we should postpone this type of decision. And what I said was it also applies to Quincy Farms because we don't know what that really looks like once it becomes open to the public. So the bigger
Right.
question is the timing on this stuff.
Well, yeah, I agree. And I've actually talked to Laura about it and I told her that I didn't agree that we should be delaying this, although, and because I was just talking with her about it, but her point about the fact that no one has that information and that information would be very relevant to answering this question. And so the question, so then it's like, well, okay, we can not care, we can delay the thing, or we can provide some context to try to help people understand it more. Those are probably the three alternatives.
Earl, I would offer a fourth, which is that, maybe we include this in the next online survey or whatever the next survey is, knowing that the grand opening, and I'm going to call on Emily again, the grand opening is when?
the grand opening will be September 26th, but that's hopefully, knock on wood, going to be about a month after the park is really completed. So
Yes.
the community is going to have the chance, hopefully in August, at some point to actually get into that park. But I was going to say, we can also, I think that it might just help to define active recreational parks and say, with amenities such as playgrounds and add a little list there. And I think that leaving this question in at this point would give you more information to be able to get a more detailed, nuanced question in later surveys. But I think that just providing better definitions might solve that problem.
That's very helpful.
Good.
Maybe we can work with Emily on getting a good one, a
Right.
good list together for Cherry Hills.
It's
That would
also
be very
good to
helpful.
hear that timing, because I would imagine that the timing would not be very far off from when the survey may go out. And that's a topic for discussion here at the end of our conversation tonight. So,
I have a comment on the list here. Passive recreational parks versus natural open spaces.
mhm.
I think I kind of know what the difference is there, but it would be useful, I think, to spell it out a little bit more.
I
Yes.
agree.
Do you name the parks and just list, you've got Woody Hollow and you've got
Yeah.
Three Pond Park and
Yeah,
you could put them in parentheses similar to what you did with John Mead.
right.
Okay.
I can work with Britt to do that.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Pretty good.
Good comments. Okay. So question 12 is a little more detailed in terms of types of improvements people would like to see explored as far as the master plan update with regard to local parks, open space, playgrounds, seating areas, picnic areas, shelters, open fields, lighting, signage, parking and sidewalk trail access. So it's a little more detailed. Again, it's a question where, it's not giving choices per se. It's really saying, what's your level of interest in terms of what should be explored as part of this process.
Do you add, I'm just wondering, programming of parks? John Mead is really set up for that, but different things, whether it's a car show, whether it's, a farmer's market, things that bring community together. Is that an applicable bullet point here?
Programming. I think that's a great point.
I do too. I think programming is a good point.
I agree. I almost wonder if that should be a separate question, even if it's later in a later survey, so that we could get a little bit more feedback on if people would like to continue with the special events that we have now, the larger kind of seasonal events versus smaller, kids programming type activities.
So I'm hearing we could add as an element here for this question, and then it could be a follow-up question in the second survey, perhaps.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Sure.
I have a general question. I'm glad Emily's on the phone. Regarding a master plan for parks and trails for the village.
Yes.
My understanding is that it does not exist.
We have one, but it is quite old. I can't even tell you the year off the top of my head. I apologize.
So I wonder if we should survey people on updating that. And the other, the two questions that the two areas that I think are important is, should we try and get additional parks and open space? These questions relate to what we have now, is number one. And number two is the connectivity of existing trails and potential future trails and or connection points between existing trails.
Let me just chime in for a second on the Parks master plan. I would offer to you that that is a very specific goal that might be included in the plan, but I don't know if we necessarily need to make that a high level introductory survey question. In a lot of ways, the decision to pull a trigger on those kinds of plans is based on a variety of other factors that you guys, P&Z, and also PTRC might make a recommendation to City Council. I think we can get to that kind of information through a lot of the other questions and feedback that we're going to get through this process without, again, I'm trying to be mindful of the overall length of this survey,
Right.
sort of spending an entire question on that.
No, I think that's a good point. And I think, your typical survey taker may go, what do you mean a master plan for parks and trails? Isn't that kind of what we're doing here?
Yeah.
So I think that point's well taken. What about trail connectivity though, and additional open space?
And I was going to add at that point, it's an interesting thing on trail connectivity, which, by the way, in the existing master plan, connectivity is pointed out. And there was a view that ultimately trail connectivity and protecting our current trails, whether they connected or not, but ultimately they might, was an important thing. And we went through, a lawsuit not too long ago,
Right.
with regard to eliminating trails that didn't connect. And there was, that council at that time was really, really concerned with saying, hey, we don't know. The whole point is we're supposed to try to connect those trails at some point. You don't know what it's going to be in the future.
Right.
And that also played a role in the last election as well, which is, hey, what is this council doing? Having lawsuits with our residents, et cetera, let those trails go. They don't do anything. That was a really, really interesting topic there at the end of the day. Again, we do have lots of trails that don't connect, but could someday. And the question is, hey, community, do you want us to try to preserve what we have and or look to connect? Or, hey, if it doesn't connect, don't worry about it. Get some value some other way. It's a question that certainly had a lot of impact a couple of years ago.
Well, and therefore we should probably address it in
Right.
the master plan.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Ed.
I agree. I think adding a question on connectivity would be good. And I would say also asking about additional parks.
Or adding that as an option at least.
Right.
I think both of those would be helpful.
Let us work on some wording on that.
Great.
Okay. So now we're on to question 13, which has already been alluded to, the question about the Quincy Farm.
And before we jump into this too much, I know we have Emily on the call with us, and she's been a great help so far. I would ask her to talk a little bit about, the process that's underway and what the goal of the outcome of that is and how it relates to the process we're in now with this master plan.
Yeah, so Quincy Farm Committee is working on their master plan right now. So they're working with another consultant to develop that. And that plan will have, recommendations for access, what improvements to make at the farm, how it should be funded, programming, on and on. So they're in the process of gathering feedback on their first draft of their plan right now. So that's our recommendation, is to just let the Quincy Farm committee continue with their process and not get crossways and sort of create some confusion about what avenue people should be providing feedback through, or what commission people should be contacting about this. So just let them go through their process and work through their plan and get that wrapped up with their recommendations.
And I'll
So-
just offer a little bit of a parallel to help illustrate why including it here may create some challenges. You know, a few years back on the state ballot, there was some education funding, and there was 2 different ballot initiatives, I think, and they got submitted by different groups. And you know, one tried to do funding through this way, and another didn't want to do funding that way, and it thought through another, and both passed. And then you're stuck, and then what do we do with this now? They're working at cross purposes. If we were to go through a survey asking about Quincy Farm and were to get one set of results, and that were to counter the public input portion of what's happening at Quincy Farms,
Sure.
we're now sort of stuck.
Big problem.
Yeah.
Well, and let me add a comment here, though, that I think is relevant. And Emily, you might comment on this. And I know exactly where Emily's coming from, believe me. And if anybody deserves a Medal of Honor for having to deal with that, it's Emily, that's for sure, in terms of everything associated with Quincy Farms. But the master plan for the Quincy Farms is in the process of being put together, and that's going to be made a recommendation to council at some point and will be adopted. Okay. And is it a relevant question to the adoption of that plan or to the development of the plan itself? Depending upon what the residents would say in terms of going, hey, should the city spend taxpayer dollars and significant resources on this farm if there's limited access to the community or not? And that really is a significant question. And for instance, there's literally been discussion from time to time about going, based on the conservation easement and or which way that whole interpretation may go, is Quincy Farms better off in a private foundation than it is for the city? And it's really going to depend at the end of the day on that issue about the access from the community and the use that the community will be able to make of it.
Earl, I absolutely agree that it's an important question. My worry is when we start, you know as well as anybody, when we start getting into the access question, we can ask the question, but then at a certain point, it's also out of the city's hands. Since for those who aren't familiar with Quincy Farm, the conservation easement on the farm is held by another nonprofit, Colorado Open Lands. So the city really makes requests of Colorado Open Lands and answers to Colorado Open Lands in terms of what we can and can't do on the property. So the issue that the Quincy Farm Committee has had to be very thoughtful and very deliberate about is when they go out in the community and they've asked survey questions, being very careful about asking people, do you want this or this? Because we also don't want to sort of make these promises about access that we might find out later that we can't keep. So it turns into a really difficult, kind of sticky situation, being able to communicate adequately what we need to communicate about the nuances of the property when we're talking to the public. So
Let me build on that. So Emily, I think when we get done with the Quincy Farm master plan, we'll have a set of recommendations that hopefully have that level of buy-off, from the nonprofit. Earl, I think your question is the question of the day, if you ask me. I mean, it could not be more spot on. I think the timing of that question is really the critical part. And I think if we were able to ask the community that kind of question, once we knew what was available, then it might carry the day one way or the other. I don't really, whatever direction the community wants to go is the direction they want to go. But I do think it is such a tricky subject. And especially given the fact that the committee is already going through the process, that might be a better question to ask later on. It may not be a part of this master plan. It may be a standalone effort. It may be, it may be a follow-up to the Quincy Farm master plan process. I think it is a critical question. I just don't know if it belongs in this process today.
No, and I can agree with that, but what I just want to say, and Emily, correct, because, I got off that committee has there, because I would have said the development of the Quincy Farm master plan, that would have been a question that needed to be asked and developed from the community as part of developing the Quincy Farm master plan, are these questions. So the question is, will that kind of input, was that garnered from the community during this master plan, Quincy plan master plan process? And will that be part of it? Do you have an answer? Do you have a feel for that? Because that really is the thing at the end of the day. That's what's going to go in front of council, this master plan. And is the community input there with regard to the types of resources spent? Is that going to be part of that master plan presentation?
The committee doesn't have, the committee didn't ask a survey question of basically, should the city spend money on this? Their survey questions and their public input has really been focused on ways to activate the farm, not whether or not to activate the farm. So they're operating under the assumption that people want some access to the farm, people want some programming to the farm, or at the farm, and that has been borne out in their public input process. Obviously varying levels of access, varying types of programming, whether or not to have animals, that type of thing. But, we're not hearing from the community, do nothing and keep it closed.
So I have a suggestion, if I may, in the interest of time, and I think everybody might agree. Why don't we pull it out of this survey? But it may be appropriate, and it probably is appropriate, to have something about Quincy Farms in our final master plan update. But it seems premature to be worried about it right now.
I completely agree. This is Dory.
Yeah, I think, actually, I'm not being asked for my opinion, but I just think I'm a citizen too, but we kind of have a vacuum right now to answer this question right now. We don't know what that means, right? So I think that's what Chris was getting at.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions on that or comments? So are we good with taking it out, guys?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm good with that.
All right.
All
Moving
right.
on to question 14.
Question 14, as noted, is simply a repeat of question 9 from the 2008 survey, which was mentioned in comments back in May. It's a question to ask about different methods the village can use to preserve and/or fund vistas, views, natural features, and open space for public park or trail use. And ask people to rank top 3 choices among these different options, including privatization of land, increasing requirements for dedication of open space, modifying zoning and regulations and so forth, providing city-funded incentives to individuals to donate land, easements, or right-of-way, redirecting existing revenue streams to directly purchase property, or other. So this was copied over verbatim because it was mentioned as a very good question to perhaps bring back here this time. So what we've seen with the other body of questions, and really question for you all is, would you like to have this in here for this survey, or is this perhaps something better saved for later in the process when you get into more specifics of implementation?
I'll chime in. I think it's a pretty good question. I think we might look at augmenting some of it. Some communities have done view corridor protection, where, when you acquire a home or a property, you're acquiring that view corridor, and you can protect that. So it keeps someone from building something that may obstruct your view of Mount Evans. And I can provide a little more information on things such as that. But I also think this plays into the importance, even though we can't really define it, of semi-rural. What is it? And it addresses some open space issues that, you know, are important, but I think as a community, we have a tough time trying to figure out exactly what is that. So I like the question, but I might wordsmith it a Chad a little bit. And I'll send some comments to Chris and share that.
Okay.
Sounds good, Bill. I will just say view planes, regulated view planes, the most famous example probably in the country is actually the city and county of Denver. Those view planes all originate at public places. None of those view plane corridors are there to protect private views. So, you know, I think I personally want to be a little careful of getting in the business of protecting private property views. When we have other tools to do that, I'm not suggesting it's not important, but bulk plane, height limitations, there's other bulk standards that we can use to help get there without, in essence, becoming a easement holder on behalf of a private property holder. And I don't know, Kathy, if you have any input on top of that, but
No, I think you've said what I would say.
In addition, I don't think it serves the city's interests to write a lawyer's relief act.
I concur, Commissioner.
The lawyer agrees.
I'm one of the minority there, right?
But Bill, yeah, let's chat.
I think this is a great question. Should it go in the next survey though? Would it fit better there, Chris and Brett?
I would say usually this kind of detailed implementation question you would save till a little bit later in the process. Chris?
Yeah, it is a little bit more nuanced. So I don't think it would interrupt the flow of what we're trying to get at with the first one. So this easily could be one of the ones where we're trying to save bandwidth and put it in the second round.
Yeah, the other thing to add is that I haven't heard, well, there's a few questions coming out of the survey. I have not heard several coming out. So we still have a pretty meaty survey if this one comes out. We still have a pretty good set.
Yeah.
Okay. Question 14. Okay.
Question 15.
Question 15 does not have any images associated. It's more of a policy type question. I believe the master plan update should explore the following services and strategies for seniors in Cherry Hills Village: programs, senior shuttle services, assistance with home maintenance, property maintenance, training information to prevent elder abuse, coordination with Dr. Cog's senior ombudsman program, and connecting residents with options for counseling and other Dr. Cog. So it's more in terms of how can the city help with the growing population of aging adults and so forth. How much does the master plan update delve into this and what areas?
Two bits of flavor for this, Brett. I might actually suggest that we just, instead of saying the master plan update should explore, maybe we just say the city explore. Having the master plan answer all of those questions may not be realistic. But second of all, to the commission, we got some of these ideas about these programs through some of our regional partners. We did have a discussion about whether or not, I know that the commission was a little lukewarm on this topic at our last discussion. I do think it warrants whether or not you think, once you see how the flesh on the bone actually looks, do you still think that this is a question we should be asking?
Chris, the question I have is, has there been a demographic study that shows our population has increased? Because in my neighborhood, Devinger, it has definitely decreased. I'm one of the old farts in the neighborhood. So I just wonder, is it relevant? We might be younger than what we think, and it's not a tremendous big issue.
There's that, but it seems to me that historically master plans have dealt with such issues as transportation, land use, parks and recreation, more of the, let's call it the physical components of a municipality. This starts to get into people services, which is really a different ballgame and may lie well beyond the abilities of the municipality, in this case, the village, of making any kind of meaningful contribution. As it's stated right now, this is kind of in the same league as apple pie and the flag, etc. So again, does this thing really belong here?
Yeah, Commissioner, I think as we put meat on the bone, we were wondering the same thing.
Do we scrap it?
My 2 cents, I don't think it belongs here.
Okay,
I don't think it belongs here either.
pretty loud and clear.
That was easy.
I'm glad we went through the exercise. It was good to explore it. And, you know, when we have town hall meetings and additional community input, I think we're going to be much better able to talk about this topic. But
Yeah.
So it's a good exercise, but I don't think it necessarily fits at this point.
I don't think you need a vote on that, Mike.
I think we're good. Let's take it out.
Yeah, it's gone. Question 16, sustainability, is a similar question regarding whether the question is needed as part of the survey. And it's, again, it's a question for you all. We are listing here various sustainability initiatives that the Cherry Hills Village has already completed here, including outcomes of a sustainability retreat in 2018, National Green Building Standards, and then Southwest Colorado offering services within the village. So the question is, given these existing sustainability initiatives, are you interested in having the city of Cherry Hills Village pursue additional sustainability initiatives? So it's a fairly high level question. Really just leave it to the group here for some discussion on whether they'd like to have a question here tied to sustainability brought in, or perhaps a modification of this one.
Earlier, Chair Lemaire
Yes.
offered the possibility of substituting the concept or word of resilience versus sustainability. And prima facie, that sounds interesting, but again, you know, we got to flesh it out with some kind of examples.
Yes. I agree. I think the concepts are very important. I think people are very concerned about sustainability and resiliency. I think the 3 bullet points here are good, but what do they mean as a practical matter? We need to know what exactly that means. And I think we need specific questions about, you know, do you favor solar rooftops? Do you favor incentivizing cool roofs? Do you want a more proactive composting service in the village? We can come up with specific bullet points and get their feedback on a scale of 1 to 5.
You want to do that now, or do you want to put that in a subsequent survey?
Well, I don't, you know, I'd be happy to take a stab at that, you guys, and come up with a list. And
You
then we
know,
could-
I think, Mike, it's sort of complementary to the semi-rural issue too. It can play to that.
Yeah. I think it's a threshold question that should go in the initial survey, as long as we don't get too specific.
Although I will say that I do appreciate in this question in specific that you there's that more kind of background that we've talked about in several of the other questions. I suspect there are a lot, kind of as a global comment, I suspect there are a lot of new people who are new to the village that won't have the context on several of the pieces that we have in here. So we've touched on that, right? Adding some more background. So I do appreciate having the background as to what Cherry Hills has done already. I think that's helpful.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
Commissioner, I agree. That's part of the reason why we put it in here. You know, there have been sustainability efforts undertaken in the past with frankly limited response by the community. The residential building permit rebate program has only, I think, had 1 person take advantage of it. So it is, I think part of the reason we wanted to provide this context, either in the question, but maybe to you, is to make sure everybody understands there are efforts already in place that haven't had a lot of traction yet. And so, as the yellow portion of this question brings up, do we want to ask a high level question here, knowing that we already have some, or maybe we get into the more specific topics or efforts or initiatives that Chairman Lemaire was talking about, maybe, and that would be a good, in my opinion, a good candidate for the next phase.
Well, I think that may be a good idea. I think these 3 bullet points, though, need further description and maybe a link to where you go to see what it is. And then follow that with general interest in sustainability and resiliency. And I think you define those 2 terms so people understand the difference. And then you could segue into the second survey with specific ideas.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Chairman, you had mentioned you might want to give it a stab. If you do,
Sure.
Please shoot us and we can work with you on getting more background on these 3 programs. But if you want to take a crack at maybe the formatting of the question, we can then help fill in some of the details.
Okay, be happy to.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Question 16. We'll go on to 17. This one's concerning public safety and crime. Please prioritize the following for the allocation of funding with regard to public safety in Cherry Hills Village, with 1 being the least important and 9 being the most important. So there's different categories here with regard to allocation of funding: crime prevention, education, and training, focusing on burglaries, safety along trails and sidewalks, safety in parks, safety for children and families, safety for citizens, violent crime, fraud, graffiti, and similar crimes to property.
I think it's a good question. And we're looking here to prioritize, right? We're not looking here to rate. We're prioritizing one against another. So this is a relative list, right?
Right.
In which case, then I think that 1 ought to be the most important and 9 ought to be the least important.
Okay.
Because it's confusing otherwise. And I would recommend adding and making it actually then 10, and 10 would be other, which if nobody had anything, that's going to be the 10th thing that they're going to list, or they might have something else that they want to add in there and to the ranking.
Okay.
Good
Would
point.
it be worth our while in the context of this question to provide a little bit of data as to what is currently the biggest issue in terms of crimes of public safety? People are most likely to respond with a number 1 if it is something which has affected them directly. But if you're unaware that, for all I care, there's a lot of fraud going on in the village, whether it's phone fraud or internet, this might affect your response. If you haven't been affected, in short, if you haven't been affected by it, what do you know about it?
Well, I think just from my short time here, safety and crime seem to be a topic that neighbors like to discuss with each other quite a bit. So, I think some of these people will absolutely feel that are an issue, even if they haven't been a victim of it themselves. That's my gut feeling. That's an opinion, not a fact. But this is a challenging question. I got to tell you, in full transparency, our chief helped phrase this question, but she's still concerned about how it's going to be used, how other residents may use it in ways that it's not intended. And so I do think she is very aware of this question, and probably would if she were on the call would caution you against having too broad of a question that might be used in unintended ways.
I'd
I'm
agree with that.
I'm a little concerned about adding any information about how we rank, what's the worst, because to me, you're leading the witness. And
Right.
that you might find, for me, some of you know my incident, it would be burglary. But I might be surprised to learn that it's actually fraud. And so I would rather save the stats for later and not put them out there.
Right. I agree.
Okay, just a thought that crossed my mind.
No, and because what this does is it gives us a sense of, again, and I like the way it's reworded, the allocation of funding with regard to saying, hey, where do you community think of these issues that the focus should be on? And without saying whether it's good or bad now, it's not saying that. It's just saying, this is where we as a community think that our police department should be focused or the city should be focused. I think that's a valuable piece of information. As Bill says, without leading the witness, just to find out what they think in general about where we should have our focus.
But everybody is supportive of adding one more other with a write-in option. Is that correct?
I am.
Yes,
Yes.
definitely.
Okay. All right.
Sounds good. The drainage-
Finished on that?
We're good?
Yep.
Question 18, drainage and stormwater management. And this was also, of course, vetted through city staff. I'm interested in exploring the following ideas as part of the master plan update. For each option, select the following: not interested, somewhat uninterested. And again, we could change the middle one to be neutral, somewhat interested, or very interested. So options here, and these get into specifics. Charging increased development fees or taxes to fund regional stormwater facilities, such as facilities that would discharge into the Highline Canal. Encouraging the discharge of stormwater into the Highline Canal in order to reduce the need for on-site detention for individual properties, and providing funding to make it happen, either through a city tax or increased development fees. Working with urban drainage and other partners to upgrade stormwater drainage facilities and other creeks and drainages in the village, with funding through taxes or impact fees, all the above, or I don't know. So these get fairly specific. Just want to get your read on this question, and also whether you want to ask it now, perhaps, or later in the process.
I would bucket to later in the process.
Yeah, I agree. Here's the situation on the Highline Canal, and you guys know I have intimate knowledge of the subject. It's a very complicated situation that almost deserves its own question, and stormwater is a part of it, but it's not the entire story. It's currently 71-mile long irrigation ditch owned by a utility company. Everybody thinks it's a park. It's not a park. There's no protection for it to be a park. And so there's a park component of it that actually is probably the most important element that we need to talk about. And the stormwater into the canal. And by the way, Denver Water is systematically taking off their customers that they provide water to, because they can provide water in alternative means. So the canal as an irrigation ditch that has water in it from time to time that keeps the trees and the vegetation alive is coming to an end.
Yep.
So maintaining that linear park as it goes through the village is a key component of that discussion, and the stormwater is a method to do that. So it's a much broader conversation than storm drainage. And I almost think we should talk about have a question about the Highline Canal in general, and I can put that together, I think, and give you guys a draft. and then get into the specifics, like Bill said, of how, of what you want to pay for and what you don't in the second survey. If
You know,
that
Mike,
makes,
yeah, Mike, hey, I think I froze for a minute.
Yeah,
there you go.
I think
You're
everybody
back.
did.
Everybody.
Okay, just wasn't me. So I just think this, I was asking Emily if this might be something that, you know, she talked with you about, because I see some parallels. It
Yeah.
is a recreation facility.
Yeah, I think I agree with the chair. I think including a question about the canal, the broader use of the canal as a recreational amenity is really wise. So, Mike, if you don't mind drafting something, I would be happy to take a look at that with you.
Okay, that sounds great.
And Chairman, if you can just send that to us and not send it to everybody, just for open meeting,
Right.
You bet.
Yes.
that'd be great.
We'll start that way. Okay, very good.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
We are on to the final question before the demographic questions, which are fairly straightforward. Community facilities. What types of additional community facilities would you like to see the village explore as part of the master plan update? With the same choices, not interested, somewhat uninterested, neutral, somewhat interested, or very interested. And these were just our thoughts on potential options. Senior center facility or senior living facility, community garden, indoor rec center, community pool, arts center, or other. So really, coming out of the last master plan, there's obviously been various facilities like the Village Center completed or in progress. The question is perhaps what else we want to provide here as options for people to chime in on here in this question.
How about a skating rink?
That's good.
I'm just wondering, I think the question generally is good. Do we want to, because I worry about what people will think when they see some of these things, as opposed to saying, do you want something more general, which maybe says the community has just completed, 3 major capital projects. List those out.
Yeah.
Are there any other capital projects or facilities that you believe that the city should be investigating, and let people comment on them, as opposed to throwing a list out at them like this?
Earl, I think that's a great first survey question format. I think
Yeah.
that's much better format for the first survey.
That's good.
Yeah,
I agree completely. That's
Agreed.
Okay.
Some of those things, by the way, could be counter to semi-rural, depending on how you define it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Spot on.
Even another reason not to lead the witness by providing the list.
Right. Okay, so the following questions after those are simply, we just repeated the same demographic questions from the 2008 survey. Just for apples to apples comparison. We can add to this, modify, but this seemed like a pretty good starting point for discussion.
And
Questions?
the purpose of this would be, we'd be utilizing it like they did the last time, which is to break down
Correct.
responses. We show that
Cross-reference.
as you cross, whatever the buzzword term is there. So
Yeah.
we do that. Okay.
Cross-reference, tabulate. Yeah. I'd say on this one, Chris, if folks have any other thoughts on that or questions,
Email us.
to answer.
Okay, that sounds good.
just be careful when you ask it about the question 23 is what is your gender? That's,
Yeah,
you may be opening a can of worms there.
well, that question asked 10 years ago is probably different than the question how you would ask it today.
Yeah, I think so, just a bit.
Yeah.
Is it relevant?
That
Probably
too.
not. I would agree with that.
Right.
The only challenge is, I know with a lot of the demographic studies of the metro area that Dr. Cog utilizes, they do break certain characteristics down by gender, commuting habits, things like that sometimes. But it may not be worth that additional information that we get if we even get one person who wants to take umbrage with the inclusion of the question at all. So,
Well,
The
how
point,
about
the
if
point
we,
is, in this day and age and with everything going on right now, my guess is that there is, there's a source out there that says, hey, this is how these questions ought to be asked.
yeah, you're right. We could probably research the wording of this and come up with something that's
And
a little bit more.
that's what we gotta do, because in addition to just what someone, in terms of the survey going out and someone may being, upset about it one way or the other, also keep in mind that this survey will be, other people get a hold of it, and it could have a reflection on Cherry Hills outside of our community.
Agreed.
I think those are good points, and I would put language at the top that says completion of this section is optional.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
Agreed.
Great, yep.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, anything else on this?
On to the fun part.
Yeah, the fun part, which is where we
The
go.
letters.
All the comments, all the letters we got.
from the letter.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Chairman, I'm going to recommend, we've already mentioned multiple comments that folks have made throughout our process.
Yep.
So as opposed to us going through these one at a time, I would suggest that you maybe just open it up to the floor and see if commissioners had observations about the feedback that they've received that may change or affect this survey, as opposed to, going through them one at a time, point by point.
I think that's a great suggestion. Let's proceed accordingly. So we'll just open it up for discussion based on these letters or any other comments you have from anybody else that you'd like to share. Mr. Lucas.
So you're calling on folks. So I was impressed by just what everybody put together, and it's very thoughtful. And I don't have anything to specifically. You'll note that I've highlighted
Mhm.
a lot of the comments that they've made, but you know what? I just think they're good overall themes. I don't have anything specific I want to add.
Okay, fair enough. Anybody else?
Yeah, I had kind of and I factored a lot of the comments into my comments that I made previously, as Chris already
Yeah.
alluded to.
Sure.
I did think, obviously we do have an all-star cat, I think, in my view, and
Agreed.
very thoughtful people. And I did like Jeff Wellborn's, which is what we're trying to get to, but he really boiled it down when it's saying, hey, what do you like about Cherry Hills, and what do you want to stay the same? What could you change if you could? What are you getting from the city that you're not getting, and what would you like to get? I mean, that really, I thought was and knowing Jeff like I do, I mean, that's typical of him to boil it right down to saying, this is what the master plan is all about.
So Earl, would you think we should take those questions and try and incorporate them at the beginning of the survey, or how would you use that
That's a
feedback,
great
which
question.
I agree is good.
That's a great question, Mike. And I hadn't thought about it, and I really like your idea that maybe as an introduction to
Right.
the survey, and we utilize words such as that, saying this is what these questions are supposed to elicit, is to get to these points. And I like that idea. I hadn't thought about it, but I think that's really, really good.
Almost kicking off the entire survey with this is the purpose of the survey.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. What do you like? What don't you like? What can be better? Those are open-ended questions, and you might
Exactly.
glean a lot of good information out of it.
But before we leave these letters, it sounds like there's a lot of support, and I can tell you all have incorporated the feedback they gave you into a lot of your comments. I do want to revisit the the feedback that we got specifically from Laura about the timing of the survey. I'm not suggesting that you do or do not need to change this survey now. I just want to, that was a pretty meaty, thoughtful feedback that she provided. And I want to ensure that we give it its due consideration. And so, you know, if we want to keep this in its current timing and format, great. Let's just make sure that we've given it consideration.
Let me ask you this. Now that we're in shelter at home and our firm is slowly opening up, but we're 20%, you know, I get the sense that people are focused and concentrating. Is now a better time to send out a survey to get the, you know, are people taking more time to really thoughtfully respond to something because they have the time, they have the wherewithal?
They're looking for something to do.
I wasn't going to go there necessarily, but and I've posed that as a question. I don't have the answer, but there's part of me
Right.
that wonders, is now a good time actually?
I think it's a,
point. It's a fair point that Bill has made, but I got to back up what Chris said on the timing. There are two things which Laura raised, and I think they're spot on. One is we do not know what the effect is going to be on the Highline Canal Trail in particular, and the village more generally, with the completion of the underpass. We don't know whether things life will go on as usual, or whether that is going to have a major impact on not only on the trail itself, but on people who live in proximity to the Highline Canal. And I say this with a bias because I front on it.
As do I.
Okay. The second thing is that COVID-19 really has turned the world upside down. And a year from now, if for all I care, there is a vaccine and people are happily getting inoculated, etc. The notion that we're going to go back to where we were in January 2020, probably not, but people's attitudes may be substantially different than what they are today. Bill's point is fair, that they have more time to think about these things and may provide perhaps more useful information in the survey. But a year or two from now, when things are substantially different, if you point out to some of these folks, here were the answers you gave to these surveys, how many of them would say, geez, what the hell was I thinking at the time? And I don't have an answer for the question. It's a toss-up, but I think Laura's point is definitely worth considering. And I realize this could hold up the update of the master plan.
David, your point is well taken, and I wonder if you asked the question twice, because this process will take some time. And do you, with a later survey, ask the question, have you changed your view in light of what we've all experienced? I think it's a interesting, good question.
And I do too. I think Laura, as not atypical for her, really hit some key points. And I've talked with her about this. And I told her that I agreed with the points she raised. I told her I didn't agree that we ought to just push this off. Because, and as David said, I mean, are we back to normal in 6 months, a year? You don't know what's going to happen coming on down the road. Having a subsequent survey might make sense, but the issue is that, well, if you're going to do a master plan, starting with the input of a survey, and these factors we think are relevant, then we're basically saying we're going to push this master plan process off a couple of years. And I don't see the need to do that. Things are always changing at some point in time. There's always going to be something. This was a big deal, I agree. And the point is that we're getting feedback at this point in time. It informs our process. We know people may change their minds. There are going to be public meetings and open sessions where people will be able to assess as we go changes in people's views. good idea. Maybe we have a subsequent, as we get towards the end, we can assess that. But there's always going to be something at the end of the day. And when do you hit that equilibrium point where we go, okay, now we're back to normal. We know what's happening on the Highline Canal. We know what's happening with COVID. There won't be any more diseases. I just read an article today, not bringing politics into it, but someone, I guess it was John Bolton, raised the view that outside countries are thinking, well, the Trump administration screwed this up so much, let's have a biological terror threat. I mean, you know, anything can happen at this point in time. So my sense is the points are spot on, but I don't think that it's something that should stop this process and push it off. I think we should just continue to charge ahead and just recognize that, yeah, there are going to be some changes, and this will be part of our investigation process as we go with folks. And in fact, maybe that's something that needs to be said as well right up front with regard to the survey. Hey, unique time, take this into consideration. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
However, I would add this viewpoint. COVID-19 remains the elephant in the room. We don't know. You talked about having some public meetings. You're not going next door to talk to your friend about, what do you think they were talking about with our communities are now sheltering in place. And so we can't go to our usual sources, the neighbors. What did you think of this? Or just getting together over a meal. And we don't know if that's going to end in August, September, October, maybe January. And I think that we really can't minimize that because there's that unknowability.
So I wanted to add to address both of those comments. And I generally agree with Earl that we should forge ahead. However, to Dory's point, especially with regard to the Citizens Advisory Task Force, that process, I think, cannot happen meaningfully through a Zoom conference.
We talked about that last week. Excuse me, Mike, but the last meeting that came up, and you're absolutely right.
Absolutely.
And so we should slow down to the point where at least the Citizens Advisory Task Force can have meetings, we can have workshops, we can have open houses with personal interaction. Otherwise, I think we really risk losing something in the process. I think it was the head of Google who said something to the effect that innovation is not possible without human collaboration, or human interaction. So that's to me, that's the key factor. I think we can proceed with the survey, but the CAT process needs to set the pace going forward.
I agree.
Okay, so then the CAT becomes almost sort of the regulator in this process.
Yes.
The speed at which it's going to advance. Fair enough.
I would,
I agree
let me just chime in on one additional item, and I think Kathy wants to as well. We're gonna talk in a minute about possible schedules moving forward. I do have some CAT members reaching out to me, kind of itching to start meeting in person, frankly. And so, we do have on our agenda for us to start reviewing when you think a good first in-person CAT meeting would be. Let me give you a little sneak preview. Next month, we have a regular hearing likely to happen. It's not guaranteed, but Cherry Hills Country Club is renovating their clubhouse, extremely large renovation project, and it does need 2 different recommendations from you to go to City Council. My recommendation to you is that we just have a normal P&Z meeting in July without a master plan study session to go along with that, or without a CAT meeting or any of that other stuff that might go with it. So that would be my one recommendation to you in the short term for July.
Okay.
Are you talking a Zoom meeting or are you talking in person?
In person. City Council.
In person on Cherry Hills?
Yes. City Council has had an in-person meeting. PTRC and
On Quincy Farm Committee.
Quincy Farm.
have all met in person now.
With
Um,
substantial attendance in at least one of those.
yeah, yeah,
That's true.
yeah. But there are specific new guidelines in place about how those are to occur in person. We will have to, staff will have to create some additional ways, at such time that we do want to have an in-person CAT meeting, there will still be some guidelines in place, whatever those guidelines may be. So we'll have to get creative and be thoughtful with how we have our first in-person CAT meeting. But I agree with all of you. It is difficult to go too much further without getting the CAT together. And what Britt and I have talked about, it's also difficult for you as a commission to go too much further without having your initial kickoff town hall meeting. That is going to capture certain folks that this survey will not capture. It will convey and get feedback that this survey will not capture. And my recommendation to you is, there is no external funding restriction. There is no external project that needs to wait for this master plan to kick off. For you to feel good about it, for city council to feel good about it, that it has the full mandate of the community. That first community meeting really does need to have the opportunity to meet in person, even if there are some restrictions. So I think there's actually two governors on the timing: CAT in person and the first town hall meeting.
Okay.
And Chris, I just would piggyback or round back to the point of how valid are the results that we get if and when we get them at some point, if we're in the midst of or still feeling the echoes of the pandemic and the lockdowns and all, and how it affected our lives. And I think this commission is having to balance its mission, which
Yes.
is, council needs this, council wants this, your code says this needs to happen, versus some of the logistical concerns and health concerns. And just keep in mind that your code says that you can review the master plan whenever it's appropriate, that you just have a minimum that you're trying to meet right now. And if not that we want to do this process every year, but and that's not what I'm saying, but just keep in mind that if something comes out that, we have a result and we start moving and then everyone says, whoa, this is bizarre. This is clearly an aberration. And we need to go back and take another look or just get some more information and tweak some things. That's possible for you to do.
The last thing we want to do is frankly give somebody an easy bullet for ammunition to suggest there may be something in the plan they don't like. And so instead of hitting that target head on because they know it might be a loser, they use the easy way out to say, oh, you were trying to slip this in while everybody's under lockdown.
Right.
And that is happening right now in places. So that's why I would recommend there's two elements that are helping dictate the timing, not just one.
And I agree with all of that. And I apologize if I was giving the impression that I wasn't considering that. I thought the question was, do we move forward with the survey or not?
It is. You're
Because I
right.
agree with that, and that ultimately this process we know has been delayed. One of the positives I see about moving forward with the survey now, knowing that this provides time. Typically the survey goes out, we get the responses, you move ahead with what you have. Well, the point is we're going to be asking for a period of time, but then we have the ability also, because we'll probably get those back and we'll go, let's go after some more of these people. Let's go after again and keep trying to get these people to send us their information. There's an opportunity to actually get a more robust response than we might have had otherwise, because there's going to be more time between when the response comes in and we've analyzed it and looking at it and when these next meetings occur, at least I think, because there's not going to be a CAT meeting here in the next 30 or 60 days, I don't think. Maybe, I don't know, but I doubt it.
We according to city policy, as it relates to Tri-County direction, we could have an in-person CAT meeting in August if that's what P&Z wants to have, but that's really your call.
I think we need to wait and see. I have an observation on all of the above, which is the CAT and the town hall are important events to have people together talking, being excited, sharing ideas. It's
Right.
fundamentally different than a P and Z hearing, listening to Cherry Hills expansion.
Yeah.
You know, so keep that in mind as we're thinking as well. One can be formal and informational, and we can make decisions. The other I view as more collaborative, workshop, sharing of ideas, getting people excited, collaborating. And I think that is a different type of meeting that maybe has a different starting date as well.
Well said, Chairman. So Britt and I did talk a little bit about a timeline for a survey in this context. So Britt, I don't know if you want to review that with everyone about what a survey timeline might look like. Again, this is now not tied to CAT meetings or town halls. This is just for the survey.
Sure.
Well, earlier we had discussed, like Earl had mentioned, a survey. When we first started this process with you back in the early spring, we actually imagined that the survey could go out and be open throughout the duration of the summer. Obviously, we're now in the middle of June. So I think we could get a survey prepared, a next draft here in the next handful of weeks, and then it could be open for input for the period of 2-3 months, however long we want to have it go out. And the additional time, per Earl's comment, I think is valuable here. I think sometimes you see comprehensive plans where they give 1 month for a survey and they gather the input and they go forward. With a little more time, we can use time to our advantage here on the survey to gather really robust input. Chris?
Britt, when would you like the input from us? Can we have a week or 10 days kind of thing?
Well, let me just offer, there's another option, I think, based on what I'm hearing about the CAT. Another option is that we could have our normally scheduled August P&Z meeting. And if we have no cases scheduled, P&Z could choose to have it on Zoom if you choose. But what we could do then is work on a final draft. Basically in essence, try and have the final product to review, get your stamp of approval on that August meeting, and then work to send that out in a week or so after that.
Right.
That's a second option.
Right. And that would allow you to do your business in July with the country club and so forth, and just have a normal P&Z. It would allow you time the next 2 weeks to get
Right.
and suggested questions in, and we'd have more time to kind of put the final pieces together. That might be more of a comfortable option.
That sounds like a comfortable timeline, keeping in mind we still have summer vacation schedules going on as well. Probably.
July 4th is in there as well. So
Slow play.
Everybody good with that?
I am hearing some support for a regular meeting in July. And again, we do have a lot of guidelines in place for these in-person meetings that everybody else has already used. And if you do have specific questions or concerns about those, please reach out to us. We'll be glad to go over those with you. But then in the meantime, if those of you who want to provide written comments to us on the survey questions, you've got a little time now. And we will target to have a final draft for review at the regularly scheduled August P&Z meeting. Do you have a preference of Zoom or in person for that? Or do you want to wait and see?
Can you do a combination of the two?
Sure. Emily, I believe we did that for the PTRC. Is that correct?
We have done it for PTRC and Quincy Farm Committee. Yes.
I think that might make people feel comfortable.
Sure. Yeah. If you want to participate via Zoom, you can. If you want to come in, you can.
And I will say, just for my fellow commissioners, I actually attended the council meeting just because I thought it'd be, they're back in session. I didn't think anybody would be there. How wrong I was. Right, Emily?
Yes, it was a surprise.
It was a surprise. But I will say that the city, I thought, did a great job, and everybody, staff, the council members, the audience, all did a great job during the meeting in terms of appropriate safety precautions, social distancing, masks, you name it. And they did a great job.
Good.
After the meeting was over, maybe everybody didn't do so. But during the meeting, it was good.
Okay, very good. Chris, I don't think we need a vote on any of this, do we?
No, no, you do not.
Okay. So I'd like to move on unless anybody has additional comments. We'll head toward adjournment here. I know there's a couple other things on the agenda.
Is that July meeting and going to be second Tuesday or fourth Tuesday?
Second Tuesday is the tentative agenda right now. Again, if
Okay.
the country club, they still have some work to do. If they don't make it, it'll actually then be bumped to the following month. So we might need to consider a special meeting date of the fourth Monday in August for the master plan discussion. But they are working very hard to go in July.
Okay, so we can tentatively plan on a July 14th meeting.
You definitely should pencil it in your calendar at least.
But
Okay,
don't
at 5 or
cancel
at
your-
6:30?
Don't cancel your European plans, David.
Yeah, I won't.
Um,
I will do it virtually anyway.
Right.
Chris, are we
Wyman,
talking 5 or 6:30?
That's for the commission to
I would
What do you say,
propose,
boss?
I would propose 5. How do you guys feel?
It works.
I think 5's a good idea.
Yeah.
for the in-person meeting, just to be clear.
Yes.
Okay. It certainly works at a staff level, so.
Everybody else okay with that?
It works at a Lucas level.
Excellent. What's the date on the August meeting, just while we're looking at calendars?
I believe that is August is July 14th for the regular meeting, and then August 11th for the tentatively scheduled master plan discussion.
Okay, very good. All right. Anything else?
I do have a couple of staff reports.
Okay, to the report section. Staff, members of P and Z, I assume we have no reports. And then I'll switch it over to Chris for staff and city attorney if necessary also.
We have had some submittals recently that you should be aware of. A, so you don't engage in any accidental ex parte communication, but B, just so you know that there is other work coming your way other than the master plan. Denver First has submitted a series of applications for a subdivision rezoning and site plan to repurpose some of one of their western parking lots. So be aware of that. We also have an additional parcel owned by the country club that's a residential parcel that has a floodplain application active on it. And so be aware, in addition to the country club renovation itself, we do have some cases coming down the pike that are, the Denver First Church, you will actually hear a subdivision case first by itself. And then after that, after you get feedback in a preliminary or a sketch plat process, you'll then hear all three of the cases on the same night. The
So it's
preliminary-
deja vu all over again.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. It is. That's right.
So Chris, are you saying subdivision rezoning and site plan all at one
Yes.
time?
Yes,
Okay.
you'll get the sketch plat plan for the subdivision by itself first, and it's just you. It doesn't go to city council.
Right.
But then after you give that feedback, they then go back and work on it. I can tell you they're going to be itching it very well. Maybe the very next month, then you will get all three of those cases heard together at the same time.
Got it.
So that's my first item. The second item, I'm not sure if you got an email about, Jim's last day is July 31st. The city council did approve a contract on Tuesday for a new city manager. I would be very wary of this rapscallion, as he is me. So, but yes, so I am, as it relates to P and Z, I am retaining some of the community development director duties as city manager. So you can't get rid of me this easy. I will still see you
Damn
at P and Z meetings moving forward. We are going to be hiring a replacement for me, but at a staff level, at a senior planner level. They will be doing a lot of the day-to-day inspections, building permit checks. Frankly, they'll probably end up doing some of the presentations to you for some cases. So, but you're not losing me in the process. You're just gaining an extra planner. So, in addition to Ethan and I, there'll be another planner in helping us all out. So that will be happening hopefully in August sometime.
Well, congrats,
Good. Well,
Chris.
congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're happy for you.
Thank you so much. I'm excited. I really am. I gave a little spiel in the city council meeting. I've been here long enough to see what I'm have in front of me, and that actually makes me very excited. So
Great.
Well, we're a little slighted. You didn't give a little spiel to us, but that's okay.
well, I don't want to bore Earl since he already heard it once.
Well,
It
we
was
still
good.
have time, Bill. How much time do you have here?
No.
Let's give him 45 minutes. Dory, sorry.
Okay, very good. Well, congratulations once again, Chris.
Thank you.
And
That's all for my report.
anything from the city attorney?
Not that's relevant to this commission.
What about that's irrelevant if it's interesting?
Yeah.
It's too late. It's too late and it's too long. Yeah. No.
Okay. All right, very good. Anybody have anything else? Otherwise, let's adjourn the meeting.
It's a wrap.
Wrap.
Thanks,
Have a
everyone.
good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Meeting, guys.
Um,
Thanks.
Sure.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good one.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.